All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation if you have one. Please do not unmute or mute yourself. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. Find this by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom. The presenters will then call on participants and unmute their microphone. If you are on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Rosine Foley via the chat box or at rfoley@ctps.org or by calling her at 857-702-3704. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Rosine Foley of the MPO staff at rfoley, FOLEY@ctps.org or at 857-702-3704. Welcome everybody to a meeting of the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization. I'm David Moeller, I represent Secretary Jamie Tessler here. Jonathan, call the roll. I see people have raised their hands. We will get to you once we call the roll. See what people's questions are before we take public comment. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Okay, thank you. MassDOT seat 2.
John Bouchard representing MassDOT Highway Administrator Jonathan Gulliver.
Thank you. MassDOT Highway Division.
John Romano here.
MBTA.
Jillian Linnell, representing General Manager Steve Poftak.
Thank you. Massachusetts Port Authority. Okay. MAPC.
Good morning. This is Eric Barretta representing the Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Thank you. MBTA Advisory Board.
Good morning, Brian Kane, MBTA Advisory Board, present.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Leonard Diggins here.
City of Boston, Boston Transportation Division.
Good morning. This is Tom Kadzis representing Mayor Kim Janey from the City of Boston.
Thank you. City of Boston, BPDA. Okay. We will come back. At-large City of Everett.
Jay Monty representing Mayor DiMaria in the City of Everett.
Thank you. At-large City of Newton.
Good morning, David Kozis representing Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller in the City of Newton.
At-large Town of Arlington.
This is Daniel Amstutz representing Select Board Chair John Hurd and MPO Area Towns, Town of Arlington.
At-large Town of Brookline.
Heather Hamilton for the Town of Brookline.
Intercore Committee, City of Somerville.
Good morning, Tom Bent, City of Somerville representing Mayor Joe Curtatone and the Intercore.
Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination, Town of Acton.
Austin Saganowitz, Town of Acton, representing Magic Subregion.
Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham.
Thatcher Keyser representing Mayor Spicer, Framingham, Metro West.
North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly.
Darlene Wynn representing Mayor Michael Cahill for the North Shore Task Force.
North Suburban Planning Council, City of Woburn.
Good morning, Tina Cassidy representing Woburn Mayor Scott Galvin and the North Suburban Planning Council.
South Shore Coalition, Town of Rockland. Okay, Southwest Advisory Planning Committee, Town of Medway. And Three Rivers Interlocal Council, Town of Norwood, Neponset River Regional Chamber.
Good morning, Tom O'Rourke from the town of Norwood, representing the Trek sub-region.
Okay, and I'll call our ex officio members, Federal Highway Administration.
Good morning, Ken Miller, Federal Highway Administration.
And Federal Transit Administration. That calls the roll, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. To those of you who have your hands up for public comment, we will be taking that up as agenda item 4. So keep your hand up and we'll call on you in about probably 5 minutes. Next item on the agenda is the chair's report. I don't have one, so we'll go directly to the executive director's report. Tegan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be brief. I just want to say welcome to everyone, and it's nice to see some additional familiar faces that I haven't seen in a little while. I'd like to give a couple of outreach and public comment highlights. Since the last MPO meeting, we have received 266 written comments on 14 different projects. So we continue to receive comments, which we will share with MPO members shortly. They include support letters in addition for the community connections projects, and those will be discussed today. I wanted to also thank you, those of you who joined us on March 19th for the pilot transit working group meeting. We talked about the MBTA's regional rail transformation and the MPO's park and ride and bicycle parking dashboard for the MBTA, among other things. And you can find a recording of that meeting if you missed it on our YouTube, Boston Region MPO YouTube. And then also just an upcoming meeting, I wanted to highlight that we'll be hosting the Spring Inner Core Committee Transportation Meeting in collaboration with MAPC on Wednesday, April 7th. At the topics there will be resiliency work and safety performance measures, and staff have been reaching out to folks about that. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us or look on the MPO calendar. So in terms of the conversation for today, I first do want to remind board members that as we discussed at the last board meeting, there's a kind of a longer term policy conversation that's going on around TIP projects and cost increases, cost effectiveness, and other topics. And we asked you to let, or David, I think mentioned at the last meeting, to let him, the chair, David Muller, or me, Tegan Tyke, staff to the MPO, know if you are interested in serving on that committee. So it would be some additional time and additional conversation. We've received a couple of replies so far, but I really want to remind the board members to let us know sooner rather than later if you can, if you're interested in taking part in that conversation. So for today, we'll continue our conversation about the TIP. That's the Transportation Improvement Program. And that's going to include reviewing and finalizing a draft project list for the federal fiscal year 22 through 26 TIP based on your feedback from last meeting. So we're bringing you a draft final project list for further discussion, which we would like for you to come to a consensus on so that we can get the document ready to vote out for public comment later in April. So the way we have approached it from your guidance last meeting is that it will include all currently funded TIP projects. If you decide to do so, you could include some new projects in this TIP cycle. So we'll focus on those new projects at this meeting and the extent to which you want to allocate any funds that remain unprogrammed. In addition, today we have some other topics, both smaller and bigger. We'll be voting out for a 21-day public review period, Amendment 4 to the federal fiscal year 21 through 25 TIP. You'll also be hearing about MassDOT's capital investment plan, or CIP, development process, and how it connects to the TIP. And then finally, you'll hear about the RTA's capital planning process for CADA, Cape Ann Transportation Authority, and Metro West Regional Transit Authority, MWRTA. A note for the upcoming meetings, our next meeting will be on April 8th. So this is off of the normal first and third Thursday schedule. So we'll have one on the 8th, and then the next one in the month will be on the 29th. So please take note of that different schedule. We'll send out reminders. And at the next meeting, we'll be talking about additional TIP amendments. We'll be talking about some studies, like the low-cost improvements to express highway bottleneck locations, a new scope of work for the Dorchester Bay City redevelopment. We'll talk about the MBTA transit performance measures and the MassDOT project selection process. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for that time, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Tegan. Does anyone have any questions for Tegan at this time? Seeing none, next item on the agenda is public comments. As is our traditional practice, we will start with members of the general court, and then I will just take you in the order I see you on my screen. So first up, Senator Brownsberger. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you so much. State Senator Will Brownsberger representing Belmont, as well as Watertown, Brighton, Allston, Fenway, and Back Bay. I'm here in support of the Belmont Community Path Project, and I'm joined by my successor as state rep. Before being state senator, I was state rep from Belmont, Dave Rogers, and I'm also joined by my predecessor as state rep, Ann Paulson. So you have 28 years of continuous representation of the town of Belmont in the state legislature present here in support of this plan. And I'm also joined by the town engineer and by the head of the Community Path Committee. I just want to register the strongest possible support for this project, which has gone through enormous twists and turns over 28 years, but we're finally getting it very, very close to an actual design. The town meeting has approved it in Belmont for design, and the design is close to the end of the process. And I hope that you'll consider this project favorably as time goes on. And we look very much forward to working with you and making sure you're aware of all the features of this project and its great benefits as you deliberate. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be before you.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Rogers.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. And as the senator said, I'm here to lend my strongest possible support to the project. It has incredibly broad and strong support in Belmont. And not only does it have strong local impact and strong support, but as part of the Central Rail Trail project, it also will have regional impact and is a key piece of that larger project. It's been through, as the senator said, a lot of twists and turns. The amount of civic engagement, the number of volunteers and activists in the town who've lent their time to help bring this along is over many, many years is really remarkable. So it's really a great example of civic engagement where a lot of people have committed a lot of time to bring it forward. And we're on the precipice of, I think, really moving this, and again, respectfully urge your support. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. Next up on my screen, Merrill Rose.
Hello?
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm a Swampscott resident, and I'm speaking about the rail trail in my town. It has been broken up into sections. Contrary to what the townspeople understand, we are not abutters. We own this property, certain numbers of us. And the town is coming in and they're taking big chunks of our properties, and they are destroying what is now green space, beautiful green space with mature trees, mature bushes. I have lost, as I wrote to you, Mr. Moeller, I've lost many 100+ foot trees on my property in the past 3 to 5 years. Nothing before that, but just lately, perfectly healthy, big trees. When you come in and you create this scar that goes between our homes, what it's going to do is it's going to affect all of the trees that are adjacent to it. So not only are you taking big chunks of our backyards, ruining our privacy, no one seems to care about that, but you're putting everything else at risk, including our homes, our cars, everything. there's never been any kind of study about this, about what kind of creatures have habitats in that area. You know, I'm an avid gardener. I see all manner of bees and butterflies in my garden, millions of them. Where do they live? I would venture to say they live in that green space. I wonder how many people who voted to support this have actually walked the trail and see what is going to happen here to our backyards, to our properties. No one seems to care. No one has addressed it at all. You know, and if you look on Google Earth, you see a big, huge swath of green, which will be gone. And what will be left? A wind tunnel. And no one has addressed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rose, very much. Next up is Laura Weiner of Watertown.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm Laura Weiner, Senior Transportation Planner for the town of Watertown, and I'd like to also introduce Sophia Gallimore, who's with the who's the director of the Watertown Transportation Management Association. Watertown and the TMA has applied to the Community Connections Program to launch a shuttle that will connect the Pleasant Street corridor, which parallels the Charles River, to Watertown Square, which has 9 bus lines, and to Harvard Square in the Red Line. It's a formerly industrial area that has been transformed by multifamily rental housing and more recently the life science industry. Over the last 15 years, over 1,000 residential units have been built or permitted along Pleasant Street. Most of them have already been built and are occupied. The Pleasant Street corridor has very limited public transit, and in some parts of it, there's no public transit at all. We've designed our shuttle project to complement MBTA service by bringing people to transit hubs. Watertown as a whole has had and will continue to have a large amount of growth, particularly now in the life science sector. Right now, today, there are 2 million square feet of development, either newly built, permitted, or proposed. And this is in a town of 4 square miles. In order to incorporate so much development, in 2017, Watertown passed a transportation demand management ordinance through which we require all new projects to join the Watertown TMA and commit to supporting alternative means of commuting, such as bike and transit riding, and supporting a shuttle. Last year, we launched a commuter shuttle that connects Arsenal Street to Harvard Square in the Red Line. We're applying for funding to help launch a commuter shuttle along Pleasant Street to connect residents and businesses to Watertown Square, where there are 9 bus lines, and to Harvard Square and the Red Line. The shuttle will be open to the public. Right now, there are not enough partners up and running to support the full shuttle cost. We think that each year we will have more partners to help us cover the costs. This is a difficult time to predict demand for public transportation, but our shuttle providers and others in the field believe that it will be productive to start the shuttle service before everyone is back on the road to encourage new commuting habits. We've spent the last year working through the decisions involved in developing the program, and we feel we will be ready to launch in the fall. So we're asking for your support under the Community Connections Program.
Thank you, Laura. Next up is Andrew Hall.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Andrew Hall, and I'm here representing Mayor Tom McGee and the City of Lynn. Thanks for the opportunity to address you, and thanks for all your efforts. You folks make some difficult decisions that have a real impact on the transportation needs of the Commonwealth, and for that, I'm grateful. I'm here to speak in favor of programming scenario 5, which keeps Lynn's Linfield Street project programmed in the fiscal 2022 TIP. The city will continue to work hard to keep this project on schedule and under budget. Thanks for your time, and please consider voting in favor of scenario number 5. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hope. Next up is Suzanne Wright.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Wright, a resident of Swampscott, and also a member of the school building committee and the school committee. And I really want to thank you for allowing me this privilege of making a comment. I would like to speak in speak to implore you to support the Swampscott Rail Trail project, and I respectfully request that you include this project in the 2022-26 Transportation Improvement Plan. We're a small town, so we only need one school bus to transport all of our kindergarten through 8th grade students who live beyond 2 miles from school. So this seems great, but in actuality, our 3 square miles, we have 2 significant issues: an extreme economic dichotomy between the 2 sides of town and a density that can cause Manhattan-like gridlock around school drop-off and pickup times. As vice chair of the school committee and the chair of the school building committee for a new elementary school, I have 3 main reasons for advocating for this much needed trail through town. We're so excited for the trail to provide a safe and speedy route to school. The trail literally crosses the Swampscott Middle School property and has 2 egress points within a block of the proposed new twin upper and lower elementary school. Having the trail will impact almost 1,500 K through 8th grade students. Safe and healthy travel to school is obviously a huge benefit to our children, and it's also a benefit to our town, as the use of the trail for the school travel will alleviate a lot of the street congestion to the benefit of our residents, our commuters, and our small businesses. In addition, this trail would provide peace of mind and a great deal of equity to some of our most vulnerable families in town, those of our special needs students. Currently, a lot of them aren't able to safely walk their children to school. The trail will offer these families the opportunity to walk to school and throughout the whole town without the worry of their child darting into traffic. And finally, really one of the most important benefits of this trail will be as a community connector. The socioeconomic landscape of Swampscott has caused the school system to be flagged by DESE for inequities. 2 of our current elementary schools have significantly more students from low-income families than our 3rd elementary school. We really need to provide access for all our students from all our neighborhoods in town to move easily and safely from schools to parks to other neighborhoods so that this community becomes more integrated. The completion of the rail trail is vital to the school district and the school building committee, and we desperately need safe, healthy, easy, and fun means for our kids to navigate around town. Please, please include this project in the FY 22-26 TIP. Thank you so much for your consideration and your time.
Thank you, Ms. Wright. Yep, Russ Lino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Russ Lano. I'm the chair of Belmont's Community Path Project Committee, which is the committee that's been charged by our select board with shepherding, phase 1 of the Belmont Community Path through the design process. I am here obviously to speak in support of the Belmont Community Path Project. I think the hundreds of letters of support that the MPO has received over the past few weeks from supporters of this project, as well as the appearance today of our state rep and state senator, demonstrate the broad and deep support for this project within the town of Belmont, but also across the region. It's truly an important and I think essential project. And I'm here to say also that the town of Belmont really is fully committed to this project. Our town administration, our select board, as well obviously as our elected town meeting and elected reps at the state level are really overwhelmingly in support of this and have been pushing this forward. I personally have been working on this project as a volunteer for almost 6 years now. And we are, as Senator Brownsberger said, closer, I think, than we've ever been. We are pushing forward in the design process. We're very close to being able to submit formally our 25% design to MassDOT. That should happen later this spring. So that's positive. And I really just want to urge the MPO to seriously consider programming this project for funding with some of the uncommitted dollars that you have. I realize that you have a lot of hard choices to make, a lot of worthy projects and a lot of things to weigh in your decision. But I really urge you to program this project. I think it's essential that we move this forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Leno. Next up is Jared Dunsel. I'm sorry.
Gensel, thank you very much for the time. I'm the chair of the Friends of the Belmont Community Path, which is a grassroots organization focused on public engagement in creating a safe off-road multi-use path to connect communities in Belmont and along ever-expanding path networks. We are very excited to see the enthusiasm expressed in the numerous and varied letters of support for this project. It's been a pleasure to read the personal accounts and ways in which this project will positively affect people's lives. We hear this a lot, but it's good to see it written in so many different ways. I'm especially touched by the comments about children's safety and activity. Our group's most important role is to advocate for safe mobility. I personally become passionate when advocating on behalf of the youth in our communities who are not able to join in meetings like this, and in helping to envision possibilities that do not exist and people may not have envisioned, like extended walking routes for seniors. There's broad support in Belmont in these communities to make this kind of a path possible and these opportunities available. Our group is also committed to facilitating communication with the abutters to address their concerns and ensure a design that makes this project a true amenity for them. Our priorities this year are to support the rapid completion of the 25% design, as was just mentioned, facilitate broad engagement in the subsequent 75% and 100% design efforts, accelerate the phase 2 design timeframe, which is being already considered, and to coordinate with the Waltham community in completing this gap of the Mass Central Rail Trail. As indicated by the letters, Belmont residents in Belmont and its neighboring towns and cities yearn for a complete network of safe off-road paths to connect our communities. We will continue to work hard engaging the public to rapidly design a project that the MPO can soon support to make these connections. Finally, I must acknowledge the professionalism of the MPO members and staff and thank them for their efforts. Numerous letter writers have expressed to our organization the pleasure in having personal response to their communication, and curating hundreds of individual communications into PDF documents is not a trivial task. On behalf of a broad community of engaged citizens, I wish to convey gratitude to the MPO efforts, engaging with public comments, and specifically for Matt Genova's direct communications responding to each individual voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gensel. Next is Alexis Runstadler.
Hello, thank you. My name is Alexis Runstadler. I'm a resident of Swampscott. I'm also a direct abutter to the proposed Swampscott Rail Trail. When we purchased our home 7 years ago, my husband and I were thrilled that the town was working on developing the abandoned railroad corridor, which is currently filled with trash and invasive plants, into an accessible community trail. After the community voted to create the Swampscott Rail Trail in 2017, the town has involved the trail neighbors and the community at large in many planning and information sessions. And so I know that the plan will place a 10-foot wide trail within the corridor that ranges from 40 to 80 feet wide, and that invasive plants will be removed, new plantings will be made, and it's going to create really a linear park that runs through our town. Even though there are some trail neighbors who do not want to see any change in the unused area behind their properties, I am here today to voice my strong support for the project. And I'm also representing my neighbors on Mountwood Road and many other trail neighbors who want to see the entire two-mile Swampscott Rail Trail completed into the wonderful resource for the entire Swampscott community, as well as surrounding towns. We hope that you will support the funding for this construction project, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Runstadler. Next up is Kim Nasser.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. I represent property owners who reside between Bradley Avenue and Humphrey Street, including myself in Swampscott, Massachusetts. Additionally, I was the chairwoman of the Vote No Committee, which collected sufficient signatures to push the town to a townwide vote on this issue in 2017. This section of the proposed rail trail is definitively owned by the adjacent property owners, as evidenced in their property deeds. Unlike other sections, such as that Alexis just referenced in her commentary, this section is widely maintained by the owners of the property and is not a trash-filled section of the trail. As such, because we are property owners, the town of Swampscott will have to obtain property in this section via eminent domain, to which the vast majority of residents in this section are vehemently opposed. And anecdotally, I note that 44% of town residents also opposed this vote in the 2017 election. The town of Swampscott has repeatedly represented that they will be taking an easement by eminent domain and that the property owners will continue to own the dirt underneath. The property owners maintain that taking property by eminent domain, either in title or via an easement, will forever change the use of the property, and the promise of owning the dirt under the easement is useless. As an alternative, we suggest that the town of Swampscott move this section to the quiet adjacent streets in front of this section, rather than take property via eminent domain for a recreational path. We respectfully request that you decline funding for this project until additional alternatives outside of the proposed area are considered by the town of Swampscott. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Nasser. Next up is Lisa DiRocco.
Hello. I'm a member of the Medford Bicycle Advisory Commission, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to express our support for the Community Connections Grant application for the Medford Malden Blue Bikes expansion. The Medford Bike Commission educates residents on how to cycle safely. We advise the city on ways to improve our infrastructure and represent the needs of our local community of cyclists. Residents of the city of Medford are very interested in a bike sharing program. Medford actually participated in the Lime Bike Share program, as it was no cost to the city, but that program is no longer available. And frankly, the Blue Bike system has always been our first choice, but it wasn't affordable to the city. So this grant would be extremely valuable to bring bike sharing to our residents. Providing Medford residents access to the Blue Bike system offers the advantages of connecting Medford and Malden to the successful regional Blue Bikes network. It allows residents to travel freely to nearby communities and public transit by bike. This is an affordable and convenient alternative to cars and public transit. And in addition, Blue Bikes offers subsidies for lower income households, making it a very affordable option for them. We believe an expanded system will provide significant transportation options for users, particularly those who don't currently have direct routes via public transit to desired locations. In addition, we'll be collaborating with Malden on this program, allowing us to share knowledge, expertise, and efficiencies. We also strongly support a dock-based bike share system where bicycles are securely locked at convenient, prominent locations. This adds predictability for users so they know exactly where to find a bike, and it's preferable to unattended bikes that can sometimes be a problem in densely populated cities with limited sidewalk space. We anticipate significant ridership from Medford and Malden residents once this system is established. At community meetings, we regularly hear concerns from residents about their desire for improved transportation options. By using grant funding to help obtain a supply of convenient and reliable shared bikes for our cities, we'll free up city budget dollars to invest in new infrastructure that will benefit these residents. Therefore, the Medford Bicycle Advisory Commission strongly supports the city's application for a Blue Bikes funding grant, and we greatly appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rocco. Next up is Maura Carroll.
Good morning, members of the board. Thank you for allowing me the chance to speak today. My name is Maura Carroll from Swampscott, and this is regarding the proposed Swampscott Rail Trail. I would like to read a 2-minute summary of a letter I wrote to the MassDOT Shared Streets and Spaces team back in October of 2020. I'm writing to you about the Shared Streets and Spaces grant that was awarded to the town of Swampscott to complete work in a partial section of the Swampscott Rail Trail this fall. One of your requirements stipulates that the applicant has ownership or control of the relevant municipal infrastructure. This is not the case with not only this portion, but also for the next portion of the planned trail, which affects approximately 30 residents. The town does not own this land, the adjacent homeowners do, and I'm one of them. There are approximately 40 landowners from the Marblehead line to Humphrey Street, who, due to the way this entire section of land was originally acquired by the railroad, it reverted back to the landowner. 20 of those landowners hired a land attorney at their own expense, and myself included, and worked with National Grid and had our deeds corrected to reflect ownership. It's been proven and it's been agreed upon by National Grid, who was erroneously thought to have owned the entire corridor. The corrected deeds are public record and can be found at the Salem Registry of Deeds, but I'm happy to send mine along to you. The town has not been forthcoming with this information over the years, so I wanted to make sure you have all of the facts. Furthermore, I think it's important for you to know that the town has asked some of these homeowners to sign a waiver of appraisals and damages, which states that for $10, the landowner consents to the taking and waives all rights to appraisal and damages. The town offered these landowners $10 for the land, $10 in an area where the average property value is upwards of $800,000. No appraisals for the land have been shown to us. An eminent domain taking from this many homeowners for a recreational path would be a long and costly endeavor for a small town such as Swampscott. That was the end of my letter. As a tax-paying Massachusetts resident, the point that I'd like to leave you with is this. Due to serious land ownership obstacles on a good portion of this trail, we feel this project is far from ready to be considered for MPO funding. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Carr. Next up is Ann Paulson.
Thank you very much for having this opportunity to address the MPO board. I am Ann Paulson, and I am speaking in favor of the Belmont Community Path. This path is an important part of the Central Mass Trail. It will allow people to make much better use of the Alewife Station. It's a direct shot right into the station. And when it's joined with Waltham, it will be even allow more people to access the station. It also has a reverse in that it would allow people from Cambridge, North Cambridge and Arlington to turn around and join the commuter rail from Belmont Center. So it has two parts to it that are very beneficial to the region. As we know, the Alewife garage is full at 7:30 in the morning. It's overflowing already with bicycles, and we need to have even more bicycles parked at the Alewife garage, as well as in Belmont Center. But this has also great importance for the local community in that it will provide an opportunity to have a pedestrian tunnel under the tracks, which will allow children from one part of the town to access our 6th grade middle and high school, which is under construction, to do it in a very safe and expedient way. Those children will no longer have to cut through Belmont Center, but will be able to access the school directly. That will also help with the traffic that occurs in Belmont, especially during rush hour, since we're a cut-through community on the way to Boston. I'd just like to make a point about the people who object to bike paths. When I was elected to the state Massachusetts House of Representatives a number of years ago, the Minuteman Bikeway was just about to open. And my constituents were furious about the fact that they were going to have a bike path behind their houses. I can tell you that in the years since, of course, all of that has drifted away. There has been little or no crime. People are very happy with the bike path. And now if you look in the paper, people will sell their houses as an additional benefit that they are adjacent to the Minuteman bike path. So once the bike path is built and people start using it and you have proper screening, the people in the areas, really much of the objection to those bike paths disappears. That certainly happened in Arlington and in Lexington. And I know that there has been objection raised for the bike path in Belmont. And I know that those people will be well served by having much better screening and so forth and blocking their private yards from the bike trail that will go by it. So this is an important piece, not only for the town of Belmont, but also for the region. I'm hopeful that you will be able to include this in the tip that is going forward, perhaps using the discretionary funds. The town is solidly behind it. It is an important piece, and I thank you for having the opportunity to address you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Paulson. Next up is John McQueen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and hello to all my friends on the board. I'm John McQueen, and I'm not only a member of Walk Boston and the Advisory Council, but I'm here today to speak on behalf of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail as a board member of the Friends of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. I think that in the past meetings, there have been some discussion about our readiness on the project 2D. I want to assure you that we stand as the residents, let's say, of Sudbury, the historic town of Sudbury, wholeheartedly behind this. And we've overwhelmingly voted money and support for continuing this project, and from its current almost 15 miles, because we've recognized that it's a huge quality of life addition to the area and to the Commonwealth. And it will, with our 2D, we'll end up with a total of 20 miles, which is an incredible addition to a great rail trail. I want to say that there have been some questions about our readiness. We're here and we're going to be, we have a new design firm, Fuss O'Neill, and they're on the case. And we're going to be submitting our 75% design in April. We're on track to do that. In the past, to be honest, we've overcome some periods of really intentional delay, but that has been overcome and replaced, and we are wholeheartedly in a position for any issue that we'll raise, whether it's a right-of-way, environmental, our task force is already working with the abutters to just survey their issues, if there are any, and to address them. And we're already in place making incredible plans for amenities and interpretive additions and things like that. It will be a gem. And I just want to assure you that we will, as a town and as a board of friends, we will turn over every rock to explore every way to expedite anything that comes as an obstacle and to overcome that. And we hope to maintain our position and implore you to have confidence in us and our readiness to keep us on the tip for 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McQueen. Next up, David Kucharski from Salem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, board, for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the city of Salem. I'm representing Mayor Kim Driscoll in support of the Community Connections Grant for the microtransit service known as the Salem Skipper. The Skipper was recently launched in the city this past December, and it's quickly shown the value of providing more local transportation options to residents. Since that time, we've had over 4,700 rides completed to 533 unique riders, providing a peak of 120 plus rides in a single day and over 500 rides provided in a single week. As of mid-March, this ridership has resulted in saving 1,168 miles of individual vehicle trips and has reduced CO2 output by over 1,000 pounds. The Skipper service has improved access to transportation for a variety of historically disadvantaged groups by deploying a Spanish version of the app, offering discounted rides to students, seniors, and members of the disabled community, and providing reliable access to a wheelchair accessible vehicle. We believe the service has effectively improved mobility for all of its residents. Your support of the Community Connections Grant request will allow the city to continue growing this vital service and build ridership beyond its initial year. Thank you again for your consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions as you proceed with your deliberations.
Thank you, Mr. Kucharski. Next up, Stephen Winslow.
Hello, this is a City Councilor at Large, Steve Winslow from the City of Malden. And I'm just here to speak about 3 projects in the Community Connections program that the city is working on with the MBTA and the City of Medford. So specifically, there are 2 traffic signal prioritization projects in the Community Connections that are focused on our major bus corridors, Salem Street, Main Street, and Center Street. I know our counselors are very supportive of ensuring and improving our traffic signals. We have over 70 signals in Malden, and some of them are very antiquated. And so working to ensure that those signals help improve the mobility of the 7,500 Malden and area residents that utilize those streets on a daily basis is really critical. So we're very supportive of that. And then we're also supportive of the effort for the to expand blue bikes. The Line Bike program, which was in Malden, was extremely successful. And we're trying to figure out how to make the blue bike model work here. So taking an initial step in our downtown area, which has been very successful for Zipcar and other things, seems like a logical extension of the program that's coming out from Everett and Somerville. So so we support those two projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Winslow. Next is Barbara Pike.
Thank you. I'm Barbara Pike. I'm a Concord board member of the Friends of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, and I'm here to speak in favor of Phase 2D of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail in Sudbury. Phase 2C of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail opened in Concord about 2 years ago, except for the southernmost half mile from Powder Mill Road to the Sudbury town line. That part cannot be constructed until Phase 2D in Sudbury is constructed. And we also have a northern portion, which if you've driven out Route 2 recently, you see that we have a bridge going across all 4 lanes of Route 2 to connect Concord to Acton. So we are very excited about extending the rail trail, finishing Phase 2C in Concord, which has been designed. We're just waiting for Phase 2D in Sudbury. So I'm strongly encourage you to keep Phase 2D in Sudbury on the 2022 tip. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pike. Next is Ben Cares.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We just wanted to, again, echo our appreciation to the board and the difficult decision-making that you have to make around these TIP-funded projects. You see me advocating, over the past series of meetings for both the Upper Broadway project in Chelsea, as well as the newly suggested Pearland Park Street project for TIP consideration. Again, we know that this was a difficult decision to make on behalf of the board. We appreciate sort of the outcomes of those conversations and sort of the ongoing strategy to mitigate concerns over cost estimates and sort of inflation of prices. The Upper Broadway project is a huge benefit to our public. We have strong local support for it, prioritizing surface level infrastructure like new signals, new roadways, safer sidewalks, better lighting, and generally aesthetically improving the stretch of Upper Broadway is certainly within our priorities for serving our residents. And the Pearland Park Street project is, wonderfully complementary of some of our downtown Broadway initiatives that we have around revitalizing the area, both, functionally, aesthetically, economically. So I just wanted to keep this brief because we have a lot of other people supporting projects today, but we just want to echo that we are appreciative of your support and we look forward to future collaboration on both of those projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cares. Next is Eva Patalis.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the board. Hi, my name is Eva Patalis and I'm a resident of Belmont. And I would like to briefly express my support for the Belmont Community Path project. I frequently bike to work in Cambridge via Alewife, partly for health and environmental reasons, but also to decrease traffic. And I have to bike along the streets until I reach the community path portion in Cambridge at Brighton Street. And the path is much more pleasant, but also feels a lot safer than on the street. And so I support, so I ask that you support the path through Belmont to help improve and thus encourage bike commuting. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Patalis. Sophia Gallimore.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to reiterate what Laura from the town of Watertown, what she stated earlier. I am here representing the Watertown Transportation Management Association in Watertown. So just a couple of additional points to support Laura. This shuttle, the street shuttle service, is part of an overall Watertown transportation hub that the town is building within the town. So assistance with the shuttle startup that we know will be able to sustain itself through our development, business and residential partners would definitely support our efforts to offering alternative transportation to the residences and businesses of Watertown. As you may have read, Watertown is becoming the next lab space area. New developments see the shuttle as a way to assist with new tenants, as this is an alternative to transporting people into and out of Watertown without adding more cars. While the shuttle at start would take riders to Watertown Square to connect with the 9 MBTA buses that Laura mentioned and to Harvard Square, we do see this shuttle considerably growing in ridership, as well as expanding into different routes that will support people wanting to come in and out of Watertown. So we thank you for your time and your consideration and hopefully approving our project. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gallimore. Lynn Simon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to the members of the MPO. Thank you for this opportunity to address you very briefly. I'm here to speak in favor of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Phase 2D in Sudbury. I had for 6 years been a member of the Sudbury Board of Selectmen and moved to advance this project, which has been done. In listening to the comments this morning, it struck me that so many in so many communities have bike paths or rail trails which they wish to have become part of their community for community health and to enhance transportation. In Sudbury, the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail will be a major improvement. And when the Mass Central is constructed with the connections from Waltham through Belmont and further west, not only will it be a regional transportation advancement, but a statewide, because we'll go from Lowell in the north to Framingham in the south, from Waltham in the east to Northampton in the west. So this will be the main backbone of a bike path and transportation corridor. Within Sudbury, it's a connector to schools, athletic fields, houses of worship, at the center of town, and to the commercial district. I think what we have heard this morning is that there are some who do not support these projects. However, the vast majority of communities and residents, when asked about these projects, have provided their enthusiastic support. And the question I hear most in Sudbury is, when will it be built? We want to use it. So I encourage you to maintain the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Phase 2D, project number 608164 on the tip for FY 2022. Thank you all for your time and efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. Marzi Galaskas?
Yes, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments on the Swampscott Rail Trail, project number 610666. My name is Marzi Galaska. I am the director of the Swampscott Office of Community and Economic Development, as well as a resident of Swampscott. And I am here today to respectfully request that you include the Swampscott Rail Trail in the 22 to 26 tip. Over the last 3 meetings, you have heard from our elected officials, both from the state and local. You have heard from our local leaders, community groups, boards, as well as residents, all who are in support of this project. I am here today to restate this confirmed and to state our readiness for this project. As previously stated, the design is ongoing, and we continue to meet with our trail neighbors to address issues of concerns. We plan to submit a 25% design to MassDOT shortly. We have the funds, we have the staff to complete 100% of the design. We will address environmental environmental issues, right-of-way acquisitions, and advance the development of plans, specifications, and estimates for this project. The benefits of this project are many, and now more than ever, the town is committed to this project and is prepared to do all that is necessary to complete the design and expedite this project. I respectfully request that you include this as part of the 22 to 26 tip. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Galaska. Cosmo Caterino.
Hi, thank you for the time. I actually wasn't going to comment today, but the statements made by Ann Paulson earlier are quite frankly offensive to the abutters intelligence in Belmont. The Minuteman path is much different than what they're proposing here. This path will be 8 to 12 feet directly above our properties. This has been discussed for many years. Our objections are not gonna go away magically like it was implied. We tried to work with the town and the path committees when our screening concerns and other mitigation measures continuously get rejected. You know, our objection is not over a path that meets the objectives of the previous people who spoke, but it's just that there's a much better, safer, cheaper path than what's being proposed and would meet the same goals. But anyway, the generalized statement that, you know, the butters are going to be happy with this when this is over is not accurate. We've participated in multiple committees with the town for many years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Caterino. Eric Bacho.
Yes, hello, this is Eric Bacho. I want to thank the MPO for this opportunity to make comments. I'm a resident of Belmont and I live within a quarter mile of the proposed Belmont Community Path route. And I have 2 daughters, ages 4 and 2, who love to ride their bikes and their scooters. And I just wanted to provide the MPO with some concrete human examples of the benefit of this project. First, the railroad underpass component of the project is critical because it will allow my daughters to walk to the Belmont Library, to walk to the Belmont Pool, and to walk to the Belmont Middle and High School complex without having to cross live MBTA railroad tracks. And this is a critical safety issue for the children who live in these neighborhoods surrounding the path. And then second, the project provides a direct connection for commuters in Belmont to get to the MBTA Alewife station, as well as the Belmont Center station via bike or via walking. Personally, I plan to use the path to bike to both stations to commute to work in Boston. And this will really improve public transportation and reduce auto usage and carbon emissions, which I know is a key goal of the MPO. So I hope this gives you a sense of how important this project is for the community and my family and my daughters and others who live nearby. So I just wanted to thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Bacho. Emily Teller.
Thank you very much for recognizing me. I wanted to thank the MPO for the work they did last week on policy discussion. It's so rare to be able to have the time and take the time to do that. And I'm just impressed that you are being diligent about that and forming a task force. I also wanted to thank Tegan Tyke. She fit more information in a small amount of time, and I hope to do the same, but I was really impressed by everything that she laid out this morning. Thirdly, I would like to assure that the Sudbury Rail Trail Phase 2D of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, which I've been a board member of for, 18 years now, will get built. Other projects that are on that 2022 tip may shift, but we will be ready. And as Tegan said this morning, you are going to include all currently funded projects. So I assume that the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Phase 2D will be included on the 2022 tip. And lastly, I would just like to say, please have faith, because every every portion of this project is going to be ready, and people are working really hard to make it happen, both in the town and the MPO and Mass DOT. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Teller. Bruno Fisher.
Good morning. My name is Bruno Fisher. I'm the Deputy Administrator of the Montechusett Regional Transit Authority. Good morning, Mr. Chair and the entire commission. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on during this public comment period on behalf of our microtransit project in the Magic subregion. What we're looking to do is put together an on-demand microtransit project in Bolton, Boxborough, Littleton, and Stowe, which is out on the westernmost edge of the NAPC subregion, deemed Magic. What we're looking to do is integrate and coordinate the utilization of vehicles and resources that may be already in the region, both our own paratransit resources as well as third-party contractors that are out in the regional TMA, Crosstown Connect, as well as human service transportation providers and our own council on aging vans we've assigned to various communities. And we're looking to do this through providing a non-fixed route alternative to many underserved and underemployed residents in that rather kind of rural region out in that area between the MAPC and the Montechusett Regional Transit Authority region. We believe it will help reduce single occupancy vehicle trips greatly to various employment centers and the activity hubs. And we also believe it can interconnect with our shuttles and various services that are run through Crosstown Connect once they resume services in that region. Again, Crosstown Connect being the Transit Management Association out in the other 7 communities in the Magic subregion. That area is primarily, again, rural and a population of around 28,000 between those 4 communities, and again has 30 major employers and many early education and childcare centers, medical facilities, and senior facilities, which people have difficulty getting to, which we're looking to improve. And also out in the Littleton area, there's actually under development a Amazon last mile fulfillment center, which is projected to have somewhere between 300 to 450 daily employees at the facility, which Littleton has expressed hoping to keep those individuals from all using cars and thereby clogging up the area. So again, we're hopefully looking to get funding for this microtransit project out in the Magic subregion, and again, we really believe that it will be a great benefit to the area out there, both for transportation and the reduction in single occupancy vehicle trips. So thank you for the opportunity to speak, and appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Todd Blake.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to comment. I'm Todd Blake, representing the city of Medford. We're requesting favorable consideration of the Medford Malden Blue Bike Community Connections Grant. It will provide important capital needed for us to expand upon successful systems in neighboring communities such as Everett, Somerville, and Arlington. And I'd also like to highlight that the project has many written support by many, including both mayors. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Nicole Friedman.
Hi, I'm Nicole Friedman. I'm the Director of Transportation Planning for the City of Newton. First off, I want to thank all the board members and staff of MPO and CTPS for just tremendous work reviewing all of our projects and looking out for the best interest of the region. You know, every time I go to one of the meetings and I see the thick packets of spreadsheets that are printed out, I'm just so glad that you all are reading those and doing a great job. But today I want to speak on behalf of the Newton Microtransit Project, which has been recommended for $300,000 of community connections funding, and give a bit of an update. The purpose of the project is really to supplement and complement transit in Newton. We're so fortunate that the MBTA has buses, commuter rail, and subway in Newton. And, you know, one of the challenges we have is so many people don't live or work in the catchment area of transit. A big part of this project is to increase that catchment area, provide those first last mile connections to transit, and then also fill in the trips that you can't take by the MBTA. And I think what we'll see is much greater usage of the MBTA and an ability for people to live more car light and car free especially when it's compared, works in conjunction with our bike share program that will also complement it. So where are we now? We did postpone the launch. We didn't think it was responsible to launch during the pandemic when no one would use the system. But we are on track. We've completed our procurement at this point. We have selected VIA to be our vendor for microtransit. And we are looking at a July 7th launch, so early July. We'll be launching in the Wells Ave Innovation area. And the key trips there will be getting from those jobs in the Wells Ave area to the transit locations that are 1, 2, and 3 miles, just a little too far to walk, and getting those people to be taking transit. Come fall, when more people are back at work, we look to expand the system, adding more and more elements of a citywide system. A couple things that are great about it, we did sort of say, hey, we want you to use hybrids and electric vehicles. And throughout the whole project, we're looking at a really nimble system where we're constantly analyzing the data, being able to make adjustments to things like the service area, the vehicle size, even the model. It could be fully on demand, it could be hybrid. At times, we might want a scheduled system, and iteratively getting to the best possible system. And the last thing I want to just say is, I think we're really confident that this will be a success and show really good air quality returns. 2 years ago, we launched NUMO, which is a microtransit system in Newton that's specific to seniors, and that is serving about 20,000 trips per year at this point. So we'll be gathering data to demonstrate the number of trips and air quality from day one. And we just want to thank you for all your support for this project, especially since microtransit is still so new. So thank you all.
Thank you, Ms. Freeman. Next is Charlie Russo.
Hello, Charlie Russo, member of the Sudbury Select Board. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to comment here on Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Phase 2D, project number 608164. And I just wanted to follow up to express, the strongest possible support for this project and follow up on some of the earlier comments. Just want the MPO to know that the Select Board voted on March 16th unanimously to support the recommendations made by a citizens group. And we are on track to have those implemented in a 75% design to be completed in the next month. We have a plan in place and are on track to have this ready to be bid in approximately a year. And this has been added as a standing item on our agendas so that we keep this on track and on pace. I also want to echo the comments that this is really a regional project. The Bruce Freeman Rail Trail currently dead ends in a wooded area, and the Phase 2D project would bring this through almost the entirety of Sudbury down to the commercial sector, which would add amenities for the riders and parking, as well as a boost to the businesses in Sudbury. And if you look at the maps, you'll see that there are many existing rail trails in the area. There's the Minuteman to the northeast, there's the Assabet to the west, there's existing sections of the Bruce Freeman to the north, there's the Cochituate to the south. And in Sudbury, we have the opportunity to become sort of the keystone connector to all these disparate, isolated, existing rail trails and connect them all together into a network, which is a really exciting prospect. And Sudbury has committed to this. In the fall, we voted to spend $1.2 million to purchase the land corridor south to Framingham and to expedite in all possible ways this project locally. So this is something that Sudbury is committed to at all levels. And I'm pleased to see that it is still on the FY22 tip and encourage you to keep it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Russo. Franny Osmond?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, hi. I want to speak up in favor of all of these walking paths and rail trail projects. I know it's hard when someone's right on the edge and the cusp and the time and physically in history, both in time and location, that it seems hard to do, but I can see from trails that have been built the incredible advantages for the whole community, including the people who are near it. I also just wanted to second everything that Bruno Fisher said. Our area, which includes Crosstown Connect and those towns he mentioned in the Montechusett Regional Planning area, sort of have the disadvantage of not being in their hubs of their RTAs or of the MBTA, and anything that ties us together crosses RTA boundaries and provides additional on-demand technologically supported transportation is very useful. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Osmond. Seeing no other hands, that concludes public comment. If you have a comment during the meeting, please do raise your hand again and we will try to call on you. Next up is committee chairs reports. Are there any? Ben Muller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Ben Muller from the MassDOT Office of Transportation Planning and chair of the UPWP committee. This morning's UPWP committee meeting, we had a great dialogue with proponents of studies in the MPO's universe of potential studies for federal fiscal year 2022. This included discussion of studies of commuter rail bottlenecks, sustainable transit shuttle funding, access to the Blue Hills from Mattapan, and bus electrification. So we'll be adding some meetings in April in order to give us some time to fully discuss the potential studies before making any formal recommendations. Folks can find the full universe of proposed studies on the meeting calendar for this morning's UPWP committee meeting, and can send along any questions or comments to myself or to Sandy Johnson. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. Any questions for Ben from the members? Seeing none, Brian Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And on behalf of my committee co-chair, Tina Cassidy, just want to announce the ANF committee will meet next Thursday, the 8th at 9 a.m. prior to our next MPO meeting. And all members are, of course, invited, as is the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Next up is the Regional Transportation Advisory Council report. Lynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And if you show up to that meeting next Thursday, just remember it's April Fool's Day. So it's actually April 8th. And for the Advisory Council, we did not have a meeting. And we're working on our agenda for the meeting on the 14th. But I just want to add here now, that I want to express my appreciation for in the 300 pages of PDF letters that we got. There was one gem made by Catherine Canfield where she submitted academic paper, which I think will be the basis of an upcoming meeting. I just want to flag that to the 4 members from the Advisory Council. I'll just read the title of it because it's really pretty compelling. Mortality implications of increased active mobility for a proposed regional transportation emissions cap and invest program by 2 researchers here in town. So we're going to get those researchers here, at least for the Advisory Council. I'm really thankful for the person for submitting that. And that's it.
Thank you. Next item is the approval of the minutes from February, let me see, I got something on my screen, February 18th. Can I get a motion and a second from a member, and please state your name for the record. Brian King.
Mr. Chairman, I move approval of the minutes of the February 18th meeting.
Thank you. Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa with MAPC. I second that motion.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Are there any comments, changes, questions, or suggestions? Seeing none, Jonathan, please call the roll. And Jonathan, I forgot that there are members who have shown up since we started, so just make sure you call them in the roll and then mark them present.
Will do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. David Moeller.
Yes.
John Bouchard.
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano.
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell.
Yes.
Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane.
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins.
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Tom Kazis.
Tom Kazis, yes.
Joe Blankenship, and I will mark you as present afterward.
Thank you. Joe Blankenship, alternate for Jim Fitzgerald at the BPDA, yes.
Thank you. Jay Monty.
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kosis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Heather Hamilton, okay, Tom Bent.
Heather Hamilton, yes.
Oh, thank you. Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Austin Saganowitz, okay, Thatcher Keyser,
Thatcher Keyser votes yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen votes yes.
Tina Cassidy, I was told might left the meeting. I don't know if she's come back or someone else has come on board.
I do not believe so.
Okay. Jennifer Constable, and I will also mark you as present as well.
Jennifer Constable, yes.
Thank you. And Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Great. Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, John. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the TIP amendment. Matt Genova.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. I'm here with you all today to discuss a proposed Amendment 4 to the federal fiscal years 2021 through 2025 Transportation Improvement Program. Amendment 4 makes one change to the federal fiscal year 2021 highway programming. This change is detailed on this slide before you and is also available in the same format on the MPO's meeting calendar for your review. Amendment 4 proposes the addition of project number 608836, drainage improvements on Route 9 at the Route 126 interchange in Framingham. This project is proposed for just under $2.1 million in funding using available MassDOT prioritized highway funds in fiscal 2021. These funds are newly available as a result of a decrease in costs for a stormwater improvement project along Interstate 95 in Attleboro. The amendment is needed to allow this project to move forward with a May 2021 advertisement date, which is its current target. This amendment must be released for a 21-day public review period before being finalized. Pending a vote by this board, that review period will begin in the coming days, which puts Amendment 4 on track for a final vote at the MPO's second meeting in April. That's all I have in Amendment 4, so I'll turn it back over to the chair for questions and a vote on the amendment.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions from the members? Seeing none, can I get a motion and a second to release this for a 21-day public review process? And please state your name for the record. Tom Bent.
I'll make the motion to put this forward for the 21-day process.
Thatcher Keyser.
Yes, Thatcher Keyser, I second that motion.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Jonathan, please call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Tom Kadzis,
Kadzis, yes.
Joe Blankenship,
Joe Blankenship, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kosis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Heather Hamilton,
Heather Hamilton, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Austin Saganowitz,
Austin Zaganowicz, yes.
Patrick Keyser,
Patrick Keyser votes yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen votes yes.
do we have anyone from the North Suburban Planning Council? I don't think so. Okay. Jennifer Constable
Jennifer Constable, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Don. Next item on the agenda is a presentation on the 2022 to 2026 CIP, Capital Investment Plan. It will be presented by Michelle Ho of MassDOT and Jillian Linnell of the MBTA. When you're ready, Michelle.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, and can everyone hear me all right? I just want to make sure before I
We can
start.
hear you, Michelle.
Thank you. Could we advance to the first slide, please? Next slide, please. Thank you. So good morning, members of the Boston MPO board. I just wanted to talk a little bit today and give you an overview about the CIP that we are currently working on this year. We're going to just walk through a bit of the priorities and approach that we're taking. We're going to talk a little bit about some new initiatives that we will be including in this capital plan. Just a brief discussion of sources that form the basis of the overall capital investment plan, and then I'm going to just briefly touch on engagement. Next slide, please. So I thought for the benefit of everybody, it's probably good to review what is the capital investment plan. And this is an annual budget document that we put together that encompasses MassDOT and the MBTA, all of our transportation investments across the Commonwealth. So it's not just the Boston MPO and transportation investments that we're discussing today, but those that encompass all of our transportation investments, our roadways, our bridges, our investments at our public use airports, our investments in our freight rail network, investments at the Registry of Motor Vehicle. On an annual basis, it's about $4 billion that we program across MassDOT and the MBTA. So it's a sizable amount of money that we decide and invest in our transportation infrastructure network. Since 2017, we focused on an approach using 3 strategic priorities, focusing on reliability, which is maintaining our existing asset base. The second major priority that we have focused on is modernizing those investments. So not just putting back, replacing an asset when we've replaced it with the existing configuration. For example, for a roadway reconstruction project, we might be including bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure improvements along with improving the roadway. And then finally, the last priority is targeted investments that expand our transportation network, such as the Green Line Extension Project or the South Coast Rail project that are under construction now. Those are going to provide new transit services to their locales. Within each of those priorities, the divisions have identified and targeted a number of investment categories. So if you want to think about the Highway Bridge Program as an investment category, or the MBTA's station program or track and signal investment program, those are the type of investment categories. And then with within each investment category, there are a number of projects that get selected and programmed for investment. And you will be talking about the 2022-2026 TIP today. And those are a list of projects that get programmed under each of the investment categories. The majority of our capital plan has focused on the first 2 priorities of reliability and modernization. So that has, since 2017, comprised the bulk of our investments. Next slide, please. So I wanted to stress for this year's capital plan, and it's not unlike what we have done in the past, but we're really trying to focus building our capital plan driven by all of the planning efforts that everyone has been engaged in over the last several years. We had, when we first launched our capital plan in 2017, we did not have, for example, statewide bicycle and pedestrian plans. We did not have a statewide rail plan or a statewide freight plan. We've done an awful lot of work on building our asset management plans, both at the MBTA and at MassDOT. We have approved plans for all of the regional transit authorities, asset management plans. Those planning efforts are being used to really inform and size our investment programs that we are building as part of the capital plan. We also want our capital plan to be driven by our multimodal strategies. We want to make sure that we're accommodating investments across modes, whether the roads and bridges that we build, the bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, the transit access, and how we are building those investments and how we're investing in those and how we're building them take into account the different modes of travel as we build our capital plan. And finally, I think it's important that we all continue to focus on how are we communicating what we invest in to our constituent base across the Commonwealth. How does this benefit the citizens and the users of our system and our transportation network? Because if you walk out your front door, in one mode or another, it's transportation. So how do we communicate what we're doing and how we're doing it and how everyone benefits from our investments? This year, the 2020 tracker that's published every year by the Office of Performance Management and Innovation has updated 2- and 4-year performance metrics and targets for each of the divisions. We want our capital plan, and we're working with all the divisions to incorporate these new performance targets and metrics into how we build our capital plan. So they will be informing what should we be doing, what should we be investing in, and how and what outcomes we're trying to accomplish. So we're really focused on strategic outcomes for our investments and the benefits to our citizens. Next slide, please. So as I said, we have the 3-pronged approach with establishing our priorities, then our investment programs within under each of those priorities, and finally our projects. For this year's capital plan, we're focusing more on a maintenance of effort capital plan. There's still some lingering uncertainties out there. We're continuing with investments that are underway or plan to have been underway for 2022. We are continuing to support major capital programs that are under construction, like the Green Line Extension Program, the South Coast Rail Program. We're including targeted investments for the future that set us up for future funding opportunities. There's a lot of discussions at the federal level as what federal funding may become available. We're trying to plan for the future with recognizing that there's still a lot of uncertainties on what are all the transportation needs across the Commonwealth as we come out of this COVID pandemic environment that we have been in. We're continuing both on the MassDOT side and the MBTA side to develop and focus on execution and optimization of our capital plan. Next slide, please. And I think everyone's aware that the governor signed the new transportation bond bill in January, this past January. The $16 billion really builds on a foundation of the approach. And we have taken over the past several years to really invest and accelerate the work we're doing on modernizing our transportation network and maintaining our transportation network to meet all the needs of the citizens across the Commonwealth. But I wanted to mention that the bond bill did authorize several new programs that really are there to address the asset condition and also congestion at the local level and improve our transit access. It also provided new funding for the bridges that the Commonwealth owns on the national highway system. That was an important new funding that has been authorized. We're working on developing and the implementation structure for some of these new programs that were authorized in the bond bill. And we're in discussions with the Executive Office of Administration and Finance on the actual funding that will be available to support these new programs. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to go through, highlight a few of the programs that are authorized in the bond bill that you will see in this capital investment plan that we will be releasing in May and finalizing in June. One of the key programs that we're really pleased that got authorized was the new Municipal Pavement program that's going to focus on improving the conditions of pavement that's owned by the municipalities. I think that this will be a key link to some of the pavement programs that we have under the Highway Division for our interstate and non-interstate program. And this really starts to address some of the concerns at the municipal level that we have heard over the past years. 100 million was authorized, and that's of course over a multi-year effort. We're planning on programming 10 million if the funding is approved as discussed with the Executive Office of A&F. One of the other key programs that was authorized that we'll be launching for this year's capital plan is the Transit Infrastructure Improvements Program. And this supports transit supportive infrastructure that could be used at the municipality level, both for the MPTAs and the regional transit authorities. And if we think about transit supportive infrastructure, it might be transit signal prioritization project or a dedicated bus lane. Investments of that sort that really improve the overall delivery of the transit operations and enhance the benefit to the transit riders. Another program that was authorized in the bond bill that has been that was launched in fiscal year 2021 was the Shared Streets and Program. I think some of the communities have talked about this program as having been, a game changer for them during the COVID pandemic. It was named the Public Realm Improvements Authorization in the bond bill. We've known it as the Shared Streets and Spaces Program, and we're happy that the legislature recognized the success of the program, and they authorized this program and will continuing to program new grants under that program going forward. Next slide, please. And one of the other programs that's key, that the new funding that's been proposed is for what we're calling the Next Generation Bridges. And it's going to focus, it's going to be different than the original Accelerated Bridge program that focused on the large mega projects throughout the Commonwealth, bridge projects throughout the Commonwealth. This one's going to focus more on bridge preservation and the bundling of smaller bridge projects across the Commonwealth. 1.25 billion was authorized for that program over a multi-year effort. Could I have the next slide, please? So I did want to talk a little bit about the Next Gen Bridge program, because you will see this come before you as we identify projects, eligible projects. The Highway Division currently is working on identifying a list of eligible projects that would be funded under this program. All of these projects are federally funded. Consistent with our guidance from our federal partners with Federal Highway Administration, MassDOT and the Federal Highway will be executing a memorandum of intent that really defines the parameters for this program. And what types of bridges, what's eligible, etc. So all of the identified projects, as they get identified and get proposed to be programmed, will be added to the STIP. So they'll be amended into we are anticipating they're going to be amended into the STIP for 2022 to 2026 and future STIPs beyond that, because they are eligible for federal funding. The graph that I'm showing on the screen sort of illustrates what are the benefits of investing in what this additional money will get us for investing in our bridges across the Commonwealth. The red line represents sort of our target, 10%. We want no more than 10% of what we call our National Highway System bridge deck area in poor condition. So no more than 10% in poor condition. The blue line represents where we are, which is it was above 12%, dipped down with the completion of some of those mega bridges under the Accelerated Bridge program. But at the investments that we had been able to make, it had been trending back up. The green dotted line represents how the additional funding that's been authorized with the new grant anticipation notes will benefit the long-term condition of our bridges across the Commonwealth. It'll get us to achieve that 10% goal that we're working towards. Next slide, please. As you will be discussing today, the Boston MPO meeting, there's another significant plan that the Commonwealth builds, and that is the State Transportation Improvement Program. So we have been working on the 5-year STIP for 2022 to 2026, concurrently with developing the CIP. And I like to think of the STIP as a major subset of the CIP. So the STIP governs all of the federally funded roadway and transit projects across the Commonwealth, both for MassDOT, the MBTA, and the regional transit authorities. It is federally required by the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration and gets approved by those entities. All the projects that you will be discussing today and that the rest of the MPOs across the Commonwealth will be discussing are programmed into the CIP. So the CIP encompasses everything, all transportation investments in the Commonwealth. One of the differences, though, between the STIP that you're considering or the TIP is that the STIP is an obligation document. It's what's programmed to be advertised. And the CIP will reflect how those programmed funds are spent over time. So the CIP is definitely a cash flow document and the STIP is an obligation document, but we mirror the two. And as I mentioned, excuse me, it includes all of the federal aid projects programmed by the 10 metropolitan planning organizations and the 3 transportation planning organizations in the Commonwealth. So beyond just the federal funds that are from Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administration, as sort of the graph on the right suggests, is that there's other federal aid that comes to the Commonwealth, and that is in the form of other grants, federal aviation grants, federal rail grants. So the STIP, the Federal Highway and Federal Transit grants, are a significant portion of the federal funds that come to the Commonwealth, but not all the federal funds that get programmed by the Commonwealth. And then the CIP programs all the other funds. So we have state bond cap, we have toll revenues, we have the MBTA revenue bonds, et cetera. So there's other funding sources. So it wraps the whole thing. And as I mentioned, the CIP includes those investments that are programmed by our other divisions within MassDOT, the Aeronautics Division, the Rail Group, the Registry of Motor Vehicles. Next slide, please. Since 2018, we've done an awful lot of work to try to align the development of the State Transportation Improvement Program along with the CIP to make sure we were on the same timeline. And I can't stress how important that has been for us and how appreciative we are of all the MPO's activities to work with us to align our schedule to develop the CIP. I think it's important, and as shown in this graphic, how we relate to how the STIP and the CIP relate to each other. So the yellow or yellow-orange arrows are the dependent tasks. And as you can see over time, there's many back and forth. And then the green arrows are obviously the shared tasks. We really do start this effort in January. It's probably safe to say we actually back it up and started in much earlier in the year. But I mean, we full earnest development starts in January, and then we end up in May and in June with a final CIP that we get approved by our boards. But by then we will have incorporated the final STIP in the TIPs that the Boston MPO and the other MPOs across the Commonwealth will have reviewed and approved. So it all gets encompassed in the final CIP document in June. Next slide, please. I just wanted to give you a highlight of some of the investments, as we talked about before, why the CIP is slightly different from the STIP. As you can see, the blue bar in both charts, and this is comparing FY21 to FY22, since last year was a one-year CIP. So we had about 2.4 billion in sources available just to the MassDOT, and Jillian Linnell is going to talk afterwards and present afterwards on the MBTA side of the capital plan, but this is just on the MassDOT side of the capital plan. We had 2.4 billion of sources available that were programmed for the CIP. We anticipate about 2.5 billion for fiscal year 2022. As you can see from the blue, those are the federal sources, significant portion of the capital plan. The green is the state bond cap, which is the match to those federal funds. So, and then the thin red bar that you're seeing under 2022, that's our new Next Gen GANs program. So we're anticipating that we'll obligate about 50 million in new GANs over the course of 2022 for the new bridge funding. and then will be spent out over time. There's other sources available to MassDOT, including the tolls on the Boston Extension, the Harbor Tunnels, the Western Turnpike. Those get programmed for investments along those toll facilities. And then there's the Central Artery Fund that gets programmed and spent as approved by Federal Highway for investments in the Central Artery tunnels. Next slide, please. Finally, I just wanted to close with talking about how important public engagement is in the public comment period on the capital investment plan. Certainly, as we've heard today, it's important to listen to everybody who has comments on our capital investments. We have launched an online comment tool. This is just a screenshot from what it looked like for last year. We will be updating it when we get ready to release our draft CIP for public comment in May. It's an interactive tool. It allows viewers to search. They can filter by a MassDOT division. So if they want to look at highway division and the types of investments the highway division has, they can search by the division. They can search by municipality. They can search by an MPO. So they can search for all the Boston MPO investments, and that will be reflected. You can also search by a project name, or if you want, you can even enter in your own address, and it'll tell you all the projects nearby. So it will be available online at the link identified, and we will have mapped all of the investments in the capital investment plan will be reflected through the online public comment tool when we launch in May. And I'll take any questions before I turn over the next discussion to Jillian Linnell to talk about the MBTA capital plan.
Thank you, Michelle. Any questions for Michelle? Brian Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Michelle. Very, very helpful. A lot of information there. Can you just talk a little bit about how, if there is a federal infrastructure bill, how it will work vis-a-vis all these plans and all these processes? Thank you.
At this point, we do not have any of those new funds programmed. And obviously, we have not in the past amended our capital investment plan midway through the year. However, we will, and I think what we're trying to do is sort of set the foundation for what might happen in the future without really knowing what we're going to get. And obviously, we will be back. We will be revisiting the capital plan for 23. And as we learn more about what federal funds might become available and for how they can be used and what's eligible to be spent, we will incorporate that as we build the 23 to 27 capital plan.
Ken Miller.
Thank you, David. Just on that, Brian, just to your question, yes, we don't know. Nobody knows anything about what's going to happen with the next transportation bill reauthorization. There is that $150 million or so that is available for the next 4 years. As Bill, I think that's what Michelle, that's what you were referring to in terms of not having that program yet. I did have a question about the next gen bridge, and we can take this offline if it's more appropriate, but you showed $50 million in 2022. I'm presuming that's you're going to be starting to do projects, but that's not any AC, you're not going to be converting any of it until 2026 or so. Is that correct?
So, Ken, good question. That's an obligation. So that's what we're anticipating. We might begin to obligate in 2022, but you're right. That won't be the actual spend or the conversion or how we would end up structuring that. We still have to pull together the list of projects. Obviously, we would be presenting projects to the Boston MPO and other MPOs for inclusion in the STIP. And I get at this point, I would anticipate that list of projects would be amended in once we had an approved STIP for 2022 to 2026, but I'll defer to David on that answer. And then we would look to see that expenditure over time and then obviously conversions down the road.
Thanks, Michelle. Lynn Diggins.
I just wanted to comment on the CIP online comment tool. It's very good. I'm really impressed with it. I want to thank you for making it so easy for people to comment on me, to the extent that we really want to get people more involved and engaged with what we do. Tools like this are really, really good. So thank you.
You're welcome, Lynn. Thank you. Jen Constable?
Thank you. And thank you, Michelle, for what was really a comprehensive presentation. Could you speak a little bit to the recommendations, specifically those items that were not recommended in the CIP? And I was focused a bit on the 30 million for water transportation.
It's not that they will not be considered. I think we're working on developing a program to implement the authorizations that were included in the transportation bond bill and internally at MassDOT. And so we don't yet have a structure developed and an implementation plan put in place. And we will be considering these authorizations and programs as we build the next capital plan for 23.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we go on to Jillian? Seeing none, Jillian, you're up.
Great. Good morning, everyone. As I think most of you know me, my name is Jillian Linnell. I am the Director of Capital Programming at the MBTA. Today, I'm going to provide just a quick update on the MBTA's capital investment plan. We'll introduce some sources and source assumptions in a parallel to what Michelle just covered, and preview our upcoming TIP program. Next slide, please. So as Michelle mentioned, the focus of this CIP will be an update similar to last year, which means that given the continued and ongoing impact of COVID, the MBTA will be developing a maintenance of effort capital program that focuses on continuing projects that are already underway with some targeted investments for the future. Next slide, please. The overall approach for how we develop the CIP and the related TIP is similar to past years and laid out here. As many of you may recall, because I think we've given this update to the MPO a couple of times now, the MBTA process to update our CIP typically kicks off in the November-December timeframe, and as Michelle already mentioned, wraps up in June with the final vote by the joint board. To date, we have completed our call for projects, completed project scoring and evaluation, and have had a number of discussions around project prioritization. We've also completed our cash flow analysis, developed initial source estimates, and are continuing to refine our sources, cash flows, and project sequencing in advance of completing our fiscally constrained capital investment plan. Next slide, please. While the CIP development process remains pretty similar to past years, this update does reflect some notable improvements from earlier cycles. Specifically, over the last year, the MBTA has stood up an IT governance committee. While the roles and responsibilities of this group are a bit more diverse than just capital planning, they do now play a critical role in reviewing, evaluating, and prioritizing all of our IT-related capital project requests as an input into the overall CIP process. We've also made targeted improvements to the project scoring process and have established a cross-departmental capital funding working group, which is focused on strengthening the MBTA's coordination and collaboration in pursuit of grant funding opportunities. Next slide, please. So looking at our overall source assumptions for this upcoming CIP, these are relatively consistent, again, with the last couple iterations of the CIP. On the federal program side, our federal formula funds reflect the annual federal fiscal year 21 apportionment levels and a 1.7% annual increase, which is our standard assumption. Our federal sources do not currently include any discretionary or stimulus funds that have not yet been awarded to the MBTA. Our state fund assumptions reflect current ISAs for the Green Line extension, Red Line, Orange Line transformation, and South Coast Rail, which are aligned with our anticipated spending for those projects. Under the state sources, we are also now including the continued annual deposit of $60 million in bond cap each year, which was previously held under a pay-go lockbox kind of source category. MBTA debt includes revenue bond issuances of $590 million a year, which is up from $500 million a year to account for previously programmed lockbox funds and the previously assumed transfer of funds from the operating budget to the capital program. And then finally, regarding forging ahead, our current source assumptions reflect the planned reallocation of $281 million in preventative maintenance funds to support the operating budget. This is a change from what was approved by the MPO in January. Since then, with the addition of the CRISA funds, the MBTA announced that we plan to return $179 million of the original target of $460 million to the capital program, which now brings our total reallocation amount to 281. With the pending receipt of ARPA funds, which is the most recent iteration of stimulus funds, the MBTA is discussing the possibility of returning additional preventative maintenance funds to the capital program. However, nothing has been finalized as of right now. So that remains a bit of an outstanding item that may change by the time we come back to the MPO in April with our updated TIP, the federal fiscal year 21 TIP amendment and our 22 to 26 TIP. So just a preview of things to come. Next slide, please. Taking a moment to look a little more closely at our 22 to 26 federal fund sources, which, as I noted, are just a subset of the larger overall MBTA capital program. Looking across the 5-year TIP window, the MBTA is currently planning to program approximately $1.75 billion, which reflects our FTA formula fund programs and is broken out by the amounts listed on the slide. These estimates include carryover funds from previous federal fiscal years that have not yet been set up on a grant and our assumed apportionments for federal fiscal years 22 to 26. The balance of the federal funds, as shown in the bar chart on the left, reflect our executed FTA grants as well as other federal programs like GLX or FRA grants that the MBTA has received. These, as Michelle was kind of saying, the difference between the STIP and the TIP, those funds and those projects and sources would have already been included on earlier TIPs prior to their obligation, and then the 1.75 billion reflects what will be on this upcoming TIP. Next slide, please. On the topic of future federal funds, the MBTA is actively preparing to capitalize on the prospect of additional federal investments. We are doing this by identifying potential projects in advance and organizing internal resources to effectively and efficiently pursue any grant opportunities that become available. The guiding principle for this work is that projects that we target for these mostly discretionary grant opportunities should be from our existing capital program, with relatively few exceptions for high priority unfunded projects that are well aligned with grant selection criteria. To support this process, the T has stood up, as I mentioned, a capital funding working group that currently meets on a bi-weekly basis to support decision-making on project recommendations as different grant and funding opportunities become available, and to coordinate necessary resources for grant writing, development, and submission. We're also targeting some key areas where we plan to build out staff capacity to support this work. Next slide, please. So shifting gears a bit to look back at the overall MBTA CIP. As a reminder, and as Michelle alluded to, the MBTA CIP is aligned with the priorities and program structure developed by MassDOT. The highest level of the organization is our priorities, which are reliability, modernization, and expansion. And then the next level of organization are our programs. The upcoming CIP will include 18 MBTA programs, which is largely consistent with the published fiscal year 21 CIP. One change from the previous update is the merging of the expansion project development program with the expansion project program. Both of these programs previously resided in the expansion program, and all of the projects that were underneath those programs will remain there. Next slide, please. So moving into the upcoming TIP, and to give a quick preview, similar to the CIP, the TIP is also breaks out our projects into similar but not identical programs, which align the projects based on scope. The existing TIP programs are listed here, and we don't anticipate any changes to these programs in the upcoming TIP. As previously mentioned, we're currently planning to reflect the return of the $179 million of preventative maintenance funds to the capital program, which we will discuss in more detail in April. And then looking at the upcoming TIP amendment, we also plan to include the CARSI grant that we received for the North Wilmington station, upcoming potential RIF funded projects, and new projects that we are looking to federalize, like the Quincy bus facility, which was partially funded in the last CIP cycle and which we are now planning to federalize, which we expect to appear as a new project on the upcoming TIP. Next slide, please. So the next two slides just effectively take a moment and provide a brief recap and refresher of the number of the capital projects that were included on our most recent TIP. This is just to give everyone some comfort as we go into April and an update of these TIP projects. So starting with the Bridge and Tunnel Program, notable capital investments include the rehabilitation of the Longfellow Approach, which includes improvements to the Charles MGH station platform and a portion of the Longfellow Bridge span. We also have the ongoing full replacement of the Gloucester Drawbridge, which is expected to wrap up in 2022, and the bridge bundling contract, which supports the replacement of 6 commuter rail bridges, with work currently beginning on some of these bridges in the near future. In the Bus and Bus Facilities Program and the Revenue Vehicles Program, existing TIP projects include the procurement of the 40-foot enhanced electric hybrid buses and the replacement of the hybrid electric fleet for the Silver Line. It also includes the procurement of the Green Line Type 10 vehicles and the Green Line Train Protection Project, which funds train monitoring system that tracks vehicle speeds to promote rider safety. Next slide, please. Under the Stations and Facilities Program, existing projects include the elevator program, which continues to advance the design and installation of redundant and replacement elevators at various stations. We also have the Codman Yard Expansion and Improvement Project, which includes yard and infrastructure improvements to support the new vehicle fleet and is a key part of the Red Line Orange Line transformation program. We also have the Green Line B Branch Station Consolidation Project and the Newton Highlands Green Line Station Accessibility Project. Under the Signals and Systems Program, existing projects include the replacement of signals on the Red Line Orange Line, again, a part of that transformation program. The Green Line Central Tunnel Track and Signal Replacement Project, which aims to replace critical infrastructure across the central trunk of the Green Line, and the rehab of the MBTA's radio infrastructure to provide critical communications capabilities for our transit police. Finally, the last program is the Green Line Extension Program, which, as I think everyone knows, will extend the northern end of the Green Line from Lechmere Union Square in Somerville and College Ave in Medford. This is a very quick recap of some of the MBTA's capital projects. And as I've mentioned numerous times, we will be back next month with a more detailed list of projects for the 22 to 26 TIP. Next slide, please. So just to recap and give a preview of next steps, internally, staff is continuing to go through project prioritization and sequencing in preparation for drafting the MBTA's 5-year TIP. We are also, are planning to come back to the MPO in April with that draft. We are also continuing to engage with the MBTA, FMCB, and the MassDOT board, along with the MassDOT Capital Programs Committee, which is the monthly forum for MassDOT CIP updates and decisions. The next CIP update to the joint board is planned for April 26th. And at that point, MassDOT and the MBTA plan to present a final draft sources and uses, initial project lists, and changes from the 21 CIP. With that, I will wrap up my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jillian. Any questions for Jillian? Brian Kane.
Thank you. More of a comment, and Jillian, I don't expect you to respond to this. Just want to note with shock, $590 million annual borrowing from the T's operating budget to fund the capital program. we're getting to the point where it's almost 100% of fair revenue. And I know the MPO can't solve this, but it's a huge issue barreling down at us, and we're going to have to figure this out sooner than later. And I couldn't let it go by without highlighting the facts that we are now on path to borrow nearly $600 million a year, over $500 million for the T's capital program. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Other comments? Seeing none. Thank you, Jillian.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is a presentation of the Regional Transit Authority's capital planning process. Joey Glenn, when you're ready.
Good morning. Next slide, please. I'm presenting on behalf of the RTAs, and this is the Metro West Regional Transit Authority presentation. It's quite similar to years past. As you can see, the Regional Transit Authority develops the 5-year transit project list for the administrator's approval. We submit the project list to MassDOT via the CIP, and we do that through our Black Cats Grants Plus software program. It goes on to the TIP. MassDOT submits the RTA project list to the Boston MPO, and they align our priorities with the MassDOT priorities. It moves on to the STIP and becomes eligible for us to apply for FTA funds upon STIP approval. Next slide, please. In Q1, we assessed our capital needs of the agency using a 5-year perspective. The programs include our demand response ADA paratransit service each year. Our vehicle needs are reviewed to align with the Transit Asset Management Plan, the TAM plan. Other capital enhancement improvement requirements are reviewed, such as building and our vehicle maintenance, technology software, EV, which is our electronic vehicle program, solar PV, IT, safety security, capital outreach. Then we move on to Q2, where we prepare the 5-year capital plan, the draft. We enter, as I had previously stated, into Grants Plus for MassDOT review. Next slide, please. Q3, FTA announces the 5307 formula funds for the Boston UZA. The split agreement is distributed among the designated recipients. An agreed upon formula for the distribution of the formula funds then takes place. We review, sign, and return the split agreement to the coordinating RTA, which is currently BAT, Brockton Area Transit. Q4, we prepare MassDOT CIP. We work closely with MassDOT. RTA provides the supporting information for scoring the projects. MassDOT reviews the projects and through a competitive process determines which projects they will support. Our project list moves on to the Boston MPO for CIP approval in April. The TIP is released and endorsed in May. An endorsement of the TIP to the STIP is required for the RTA to apply for 5307 formula funds via TRAMS, the Transit Award Management System. Next slide, please. So the front entrance project, our FEB project, is underway. Last year I had submitted this, and I'm pleased to say that we did go out with RFP, and we have hired the advisory board actually has approved construction dynamics for our construction project, which will be actually, they are mobilizing our location next week. So this particular project, which I can read for you, it's underway, and we're happy to talk about that. So there are aesthetic and beneficial enhancements to our facility that will provide a clearly identifiable customer entrance and create a user-friendly customer experience by adding a safe, multifunctional sheltered bus stop protecting customers from inclement weather. It will be outfitted with infrared heaters to keep customers warm during winter months. Modern amenities such as the installation of interactive interactive monitors to provide real-time bus tracking, security cameras, lighting, schedules, service announcements, and other program information. This project will also enhance ADA accessibility with renovated travel service. It's level with bus access on a slip-resistant concrete surface. It also encourages intermodal enhanced transportation with the addition of bike racks and bike repair kits. The facility is located in a previously vacated industrial building and a blighted EJ neighborhood. The FEB project is our next step toward implementing a future redevelopment vision by the MWRTA. It will promote accessible interconnectivity between the Blandon Hub and the city of Framingham, which is currently undergoing a MassDOT Complete Streets program in the downtown neighborhood by introducing intermodal transit opportunities, bus, commuter rail, automobile, bicycle, and pedestrian. And we are acting as good stewards of the neighborhood by encouraging area development. This project also provides connections to public spaces, including a new multi-use rail trail that provides non-vehicular safety, allowing residents of the neighborhood ease of access to major city amenities. The rail trail also links residents from the hub, the Blandon Hub, to the downtown intermodal at the Framingham Commuter Rail Station, as well as employers, businesses, and recreation without the need for an automobile. Next slide, please. And this is some of the photos of things that happen here. As you can see, we have our microtransit is listed there with our Catch Connect vehicle. The new facility is right next to it, our new entranceway. We have our vehicle maintenance facility, and the bottom picture is the solar PV canopy that's currently on the premises. And there's a listing here of some of the funds that we receive. We do receive 5307 funds each year, typically just over 2.3 million, that we program 1.6 for operating activities, which leaves the balance of approximately 700,000 for other capital activities. And I've listed some of our 5-year scenario as we've submitted to MassDOT in January of 2021. And the funding includes, some of our project funding includes our 5307, 5310, 5339, Community Transit Grant Program, RTA CAP, discretionary local assessment, as well as public and private grant opportunities. And I've listed our FY22 through 26 projects there that are currently being presented on our CIP for the TIP. Next slide, please. And the last slide was provided by Felicia Webb, who is the administrator of the Cape Ann Transportation Authority. She was unable to be with us today. She had a schedule conflict. And if you have any questions, I'd be free to take questions or comments.
Joy, any questions from the members for Joy? Seeing none, thank you very much. It was very interesting. Next item on the agenda is the draft FY22 to 26 TIP development. Matt Genova.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I'm just having some unmuting issues here. One second, sorry.
Yep.
Okay. My apologies for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. To round out today's meeting, I'll walk through a final draft programming scenario for the federal fiscal years 2022 through 2026 Transportation Improvement Program. So here's the ground that I'll cover today. I'll start by highlighting the chief goal that we need to accomplish today, followed by a quick reminder of where we are on this year's TIP development timeline. I'll take a few minutes to review the written public comments submitted to this board since the last MPO meeting on March 18th. From there, we'll dive into the main portion of the presentation, which details a final TIP programming scenario and walks through the decisions that will need to be made to arrive at a draft federal fiscal years 22 through 26 TIP. In closing, I'll touch on a handful of next steps before opening things up for a discussion. So before we start, I'd like to draw your attention to a handful of files posted to the MPO meeting calendar under today's date, all of which can be resources for you as we proceed through the presentation and discussion. Items available for your review include one draft programming scenario table, 2 packets of compiled public comments submitted to the MPO since our last meeting on March 18th, and a handout containing 1-page summaries of every new project seeking TIP funding this year. To set up today's discussion, I want to highlight here at the outset the primary goal that we need to work towards as we move through the presentation and discussion. Our main goal today is to build board consensus on a draft TIP program for this year. Today's discussion is an action item, meaning it needs to end with an MPO vote to approve a draft scenario. The scenario is what will be incorporated into the larger fiscal years 22 through 26 TIP report, which will be released for public review in late April. Before we dive in, Before we dive in, it's always useful to remind ourselves where we are in this year's TIP development process. As I noted earlier, today's conversation will be focused on arriving at a decision on a draft programming scenario for the fiscal years 22 through 26 TIP. This will build on discussions had over the last several MPO meetings. The scenario agreed upon today will be included in the draft TIP that we anticipate releasing for public comment in late April, which puts us on track for a final TIP endorsement by this board in late May. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time highlighting the public comments that we've received on TIP projects since this board last met on March 18th. The full text of all of these comments is available on the MPO meeting calendar for your review. So over the last 2 weeks, we've received 241 written comments on 6 different current and prospective TIP projects. We have some other comments that we'll be talking through in a minute here, sort of separated them out to keep with some themes. So as in previous weeks, starting with these recently submitted comments, I do want to extend my thanks to all project proponents and other stakeholders who have attended today's meeting, as well as MPO meetings in recent weeks, to provide public comments, in addition to everyone who wrote in with written comments. So taking these in alphabetical order by municipality, we'll begin with the Minuteman Bikeway in Bedford, which is currently funded by the MPO in 2023. A letter was submitted by James Malloy, the town manager for the town of Lexington. The letter details the town's support for the bikeway, noting that the heavily used path is a recreational and transportation asset for the entire region. The letter strongly encourages the MPO to move the project forward into fiscal year 2022, noting the many safety and connectivity benefits the project will provide upon completion. Second, on project number 609204, the Belmont Community Path, MPO staff received 232 comments, all of which were in support of the project over the last week. This project is being considered for funding this year. These 232 comments this week are in addition to the more than 150 comments, both in support of and opposition to the project that have been reviewed at MPO meetings over the last couple of months. The support letters for this week detail a range of benefits of the community path, including enhancing safety for students at the adjacent schools, as well as for people walking and biking more generally, providing greater multimodal connectivity to local destinations like the town center and public library, as well as regional destinations via the adjoining Fitchburg Cutoff Path and the eventual western connection to the larger Mass Central Rail Trail. Several commenters also note that these connections will provide new commuting options for those who work in Cambridge, Somerville, and Boston. These new connections will also support recreational opportunities for neighbors, enhance the environment through implementation of stormwater upgrades, and through projected reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, and a range of other benefits, many of which you heard during today's public comment period. Collectively, the letters state high levels of support in the town and across the region for funding of the Belmont Community Path as soon as is feasible. Next, we received one letter on the Route 4 and 225 reconstruction project in Lexington from Lexington Town Manager James Malloy. Mr. Malloy writes to provide an update on the project, which is currently programmed in the 2030 to 2034 time band of the MPO's long-range transportation plan. The letter notes that the town has recently contracted a consultant to move to a 25% design, with the project aiming to be advertisement ready even earlier than its 2030 date. Mr. Malloy highlights the strong support for the project in Lexington and emphasizes the efforts the town will make to solicit public input and accurately scope the project early in an attempt to avoid future cost increases for the project, given the MPO's current funding landscape. We also received a letter of support for project number 605857, intersection improvements at Route 1 and University Avenue and Everett Street in Norwood. Mark Ryan, the town's director of public works and town engineer, notes the town's disappointment with the project not being ready for its current 2022 advertisement date. The letter requests that the MPO retain funding for the project in fiscal years 2025 and 2026, as is currently shown in the programming scenario that we'll discuss today. I should note that we received one additional letter of support from the town of Norwood's other project, number 606130, intersection improvements at Route 1A and Prospect Street. This letter acknowledges MassDOT's recommendation to delay the project from 2022 to 2023, but states that the project will be on track for advertisement in 2023, requesting that the MPO retain funding for the project in that year. A copy of this letter will be shared with the board in advance of the next MPO meeting. Next, a letter was submitted by the City of Salem on behalf of project number 609437, the Complete Streets project on Boston Street. The letter provides an overview of the project, noting that it will help support economic development and environmental justice in Salem through installing separated bike lanes, repairing sidewalks, and enhancing transit stops, among other Complete Streets interventions. The letter states that the city is currently working through MassDOT's comments on its 25% designs, with the aim of submitting 75% design this September and being on track for advertisement by 2023. This project is currently being considered for funding by the MPO. The letter also includes a link to a story map about the project, which MPO members are encouraged to review if they have not done so already. Finally, we received 2 letters of support and 3 letters of opposition to the Swampscott Rail Trail. These come on top of the 10 support letters for the project that have been presented over the last 2 MPO meetings. The support letters come from the Friends of the Swampscott Rail Trail and from Swampscott residents Scott and Christine Saunders. The letters highlight the many benefits the project will provide for the town, including increased access to open space, recreation, and schools, the creation of new connections between neighbors and neighborhoods locally, and the regional mobility provided by future connections to the Marblehead Rail Trail and Northern Strand Path. The letters highlight that some segments of the trail have already been completed, and the Friends note that they've raised more than $150,000 in support of the project in the last year, indicating the robust levels of support for the project across the Swampscott community. In opposition are 2 letters from the Nason Road Neighborhood Association, as well as from Swampscott resident Merrill Rose. Collectively, the letters state the significant opposition to the project from many abutters, as well as others across the town. The letters argue that the town has not been forthcoming about the need for land takings as part of the project, and express concerns about the environmental impacts of the project, including potential harms to trees, vernal pools, and an adjacent stream. The writers argue that the project has not been well planned and question the extent to which the project will accomplish its goals of doing things like promoting safe multimodal access to schools and the commuter rail station. And again, you heard several comments on this project earlier today. In addition to all of these recent comments that have come in the last week, we've also shared 25 support letters for 8 different community connections projects. These letters were submitted as a part of the application process for community connections this year and come in addition to the 4 support letters that we discussed last week for Everett's TMA project that we reviewed last week. We also just recently received one additional letter of support for Everett's TMA project, and we'll share that with the board directly in advance of the next MPO meeting. So running through these in order, Brookline's Transit App Education Project submitted 4 letters of support for their project, coming from the Newton Department of Senior Services, the Massachusetts Council on Aging, the Needham Council on Aging, and the Weston Council on Aging. The letters collectively tout the project's ability to support older adults and people with disabilities in making effective use of local transportation options with the support of app-based technology. The program will help people learn to use wayfinding and transit scheduling platforms through presentations and written materials. 2 letters of support were submitted for the transit signal priority projects in Malden and Everett, including from Gary Christensen, the mayor of Malden, and our own Jay Monty, the director of transportation and mobility in the city of Everett. Together, these letters highlight the project's abilities to reduce delay for the thousands of daily bus riders along the Main Street, Center Street, and Salem Street corridors across Malden and Everett. The implementation of transit signal priority on these corridors represents a low-cost way to improve mobility for those who most depend on transit. And these projects would further build on previous work done to study and enhance mobility in these communities, including past work done by CTPS and recent work completed through MassDOT's Shared Streets and Spaces program. 6 letters of support were submitted on behalf of the Blue Bikes expansion project in Medford and Malden. Letters were submitted by Bike to the Sea, the City of Malden, the City of Medford, Lyft, the Medford Bicycle Advisory Commission, and the Medford Complete Streets Committee. Together, these letters advocate for the project as a key way to support mode shift, promote transportation equity, and enhance connectivity in the region, bringing Medford and Malden into the larger regional bike share system that already includes Somerville, Arlington, Cambridge, Everett, Boston, and Brookline. We received 1 letter of support from the Montechusett RTA detailing its plans for the expansion of on-demand microtransit service in partnership with QRide. The letter touts the project's ability to enhance connectivity for constituents of healthcare facilities, veteran service organizations, and workforce organizations who will better be able to negotiate lower prices for on-demand transportation. And again, it's another project that you heard about earlier today. We received 2 additional support letters for funding the Salem Skipper microtransit service, which you also heard about earlier today, through the MPO's 2022 Community Connections Program. The letters come from State Representative Paul Tucker, as well as Salem residents Christine Reichert and Nancy Brown. The letters highlight the success of this service since it got up and running earlier this year, and note the strong support of the service from the City of Salem and local residents. The letters note the benefits of the project for older adults in particular, supporting increased mobility and access to local destinations for those who may not have many other transportation alternatives. We also received 1 letter of support from the Montechusett RTA in support of the town of Stowe's shuttle application. MART notes its ongoing partnership with Stowe to provide shuttle service to older adults and welcomes this project as a way to expand service to commuters in the town. And finally, there were 9 letters of support submitted for the Watertown Shuttle Community Connections Project. Letters were submitted by the Watertown Town Council, the Watertown Community Development and Planning Department, Boylston Properties, Criterion Development Partners, Mintz Development Group, Paradigm Properties, Tufts Health Plan, and the Watertown TMA Advisory Board, and the Watertown Transportation Task Force. As you heard earlier during public comments, this project would support Watertown's effort to manage growth and development and enhance connections to key transportation hubs in Watertown Square and Harvard Square. The project will support transit access on the currently underserved Arsenal Street and Pleasant Street corridors and will help reduce traffic and air pollution. I'll conclude by noting that we received 1 more general comment letter on the issue of cost increases, which was submitted by Matthew Peterson, who also spoke at last week's MPO meeting. Mr. Peterson argues for a multi-pronged approach to addressing the cost increase issue, encouraging the MPO to more proactively engage project proponents for currently funded projects to find ways to value engineer projects at reduced costs. He also states that the MPO should fund projects at more strict funding caps and then develop a process for allowing proponents to formally request additional funds in the event of a necessary scope change or other unit cost increases. The letter also argues that if possible, MPO staff should have greater direct involvement in designing projects through staff engineers or other resources, as this would give staff a better understanding of the designs and put the MPO in a better position to control costs. So that's a quick summary of all 260 plus comments that we received. So thank you for bearing with me. And again, those are all posted to the MPO meeting calendar if you would like to review them. Looks like Brian raised his hand. I'm happy to pause here for a second.
Thank you. Matt, has the MPO received anything official from the town of Swampscott Board of Selectmen or town meeting with respect to the Swampscott project?
We did receive some past, we received 10 letters of support in past weeks. I have to look back and see who all submitted, but we did have Marzi Galaska from the town who spoke earlier during today's meeting, and I see she just raised her hand now. But she's representing the town on this as well.
Ms. Galaska?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to address the comment. The chair of the select board, as well as a town administrator, attended the previous meeting of the MPO. That would have been the March 18 meeting to state their support for the project. Also, town meeting voted to allocate $850,000 for the design of the rail trail. And obviously, town meeting is supportive of the project. Happy to address any additional questions.
Thank you. Meryl Rose, please try to make it quick.
I would just say that when the town voted for that $850,000, it was under the assumption that the people who lived along it didn't own the property. Number one. Number two, that was for the whole project. The project has been divided up into portions. And so they're doing parts of the project without actually knowing the cost of other portions down the road. I don't understand how that's happening. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So having heard from both sides on this issue, I'm actually not going to take more public comment on this at this time, but if you want to submit additional comments through the chat, please do. Sorry, Ms. Nasser. Keep going, Matt, please. We're already over our time limit, I think, for today's meeting.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So with all that table setting, let's dive into a discussion on the fifth and final draft scenario for this TIP programming season. So the final draft scenario for this year, scenario number 5, builds directly upon the MPO's conversation from last week's meeting. The approach taken here mimics the approach taken with scenario 2 from last week, which sought to maintain funding commitments to all currently programmed projects, including cost increases and schedule changes. The scenario also maintains the MPO's full funding commitment to its community connections and transit modernization programs at $2 million per year in all fiscal years and $5.5 million per year in 2025 and 2026, respectively. This means that no projects have been added or removed from scenario number 5, leaving $35.2 million available for funding spread over 3 different fiscal years of the TIP. The chief difference between scenario number 5 and scenario number 2 from last week is that scenario number 5 moves the Linfield Street project in Lynn up from 2023 back into 2022, which is its current programming year. And this is based on evolving readiness conditions for that project. So that's our starting point, which takes into account all currently funded TIP projects. But where does that leave us with funding for new projects? So as a reminder, we scored 31 projects for funding this year, with a roughly even split between projects that were scored for the first time and others that have already been scored in previous years. These projects span 5 of the MPO's investment programs, including 7 complete streets projects, 2 intersection improvement projects, 2 bicycle and pedestrian projects, 2 major infrastructure projects, and 17 community connections projects. As currently shown, scenario number 5 does not yet allocate funding to any of these projects, which is really the work that we have before us today. To that end, there are 4 key decisions that need to be made today before we can arrive at a completed draft TIP scenario. So I'll spend the rest of the presentation walking through each of these decisions one by one on the coming slides, outlining important considerations and potential paths forward for each of them. First, this board will need to decide which community connections projects it would like to select for funding in 2022. Second, we'll need to address the remaining funding surplus in fiscal 2022, followed by a third decision on another funding surplus in 2023. And to wrap this up, this board will need to arrive at a decision about whether or not it would like to allocate any of its remaining funding in fiscal 2026 to new projects during this TIP cycle. I'm going to run through these all now to give you a complete overview of all of the dynamics at play, and then we can come back to a discussion at the end about each of these in succession. So our first decision today will be to decide which community connections projects to fund in 2022. There's currently a reserve of $2 million allocated to this program in that year, with 13 new projects competing for that funding. There are some considerations this board may want to take into account when thinking through options here. First, there is a large surplus of funding available in 2022 on top of the $2 million allocated to community connections, with roughly $14.8 million in additional funds unallocated to specific projects. Second, many community connections projects carry multi-year funding timelines. And third, there are 4 projects returning from last year's pilot round of the Community Connections Program that are also a part of the funding mix this year. So I'll dive a little bit more into detail on each of those considerations. So again, there is a large funding surplus in fiscal 2022, which is a topic we'll come back to directly here in a minute. But this means that any decisions made on funding community connections projects this year are really being made in a larger environment in which roughly $16.8 million in funding remains unallocated to specific projects in 2022. Also, as I just mentioned, community connections projects that are operating as opposed to capital projects can carry 3-year funding timelines. This includes projects like fixed route shuttles and microtransit services, of which several have applied for funding this round. This means that even though there are significant funds available for the MPO's use in 2022, this board must also consider funding available in fiscal years 2023 and 2024 when committing funding to any new operating projects. Funding for these projects in their 2nd and 3rd years, again for operating projects, is contingent upon them demonstrating that they've supported a decrease in greenhouse gas emissions, as this is a baseline requirement for all operating projects funded using federal congestion mitigation and air quality funds, or CMAQ funds. And finally, during last year's pilot round of the Community Connections Program, this board opted to move forward with all 8 projects that applied for funding. 5 of those projects began funding in fiscal 2021, with 3 others requesting that their first year of funding be deferred to 2022. Because one of the projects that began funding in 2021 is a 3-year operating project, it also tentatively has funding allocated to it in 2022, which it will be eligible to receive if it shows an air quality benefit this year. So to make all this a little bit clearer, these are the 4 projects that have been carried forward from last year's pilot round of the Community Connections Program. As you heard about earlier, the Newton Microtransit Service has funding allocated to it in 2021, the current fiscal year, which makes 2022 its 2nd year of funding. 2022 will then be the 1st year of funding for these other 3 projects. 2 of these, the Blue Bikes expansion in Arlington, Newton, and Watertown, and the Alewife wayfinding improvements are capital projects, meaning they have only requested 1 year of funding in 2022. The Royal Street Shuttle project in Canton, however, is an operating project that has requested 3 years of funding, which you see outlined here before you. So as you can see here, these existing pilot projects consume some of the $2 million allocated to the program in each of the next 3 fiscal years, leaving less than that total available for brand new projects. So below, you can see the remaining funding request in each fiscal year. In 2022, there are roughly $2.6 million in additional projects, vying for $883,000 in remaining funds after the pilot projects are taken into consideration. So that means that the program would have to exceed its $2 million allocation if all projects were to be funded. This situation tapers off in future years with more funding available than is requested in 2023 and 2024. So one thing to note here is that we specifically request as part of the guidance for operating projects that proponents increase the local funding match each year and decrease their funding requests from the MPO. You'll see the same year-over-year decrease in requests for most of the operating projects, though the magnitude of the decrease can vary substantially by project. So diving a little bit further into all of the new projects that have applied for funding this year, you can see here that there's a mix of both 1-year capital projects and 3-year operating projects in the running. Organized here by score, there are several high-scoring and moderately priced capital projects, including a Blue Bikes expansion in Medford and Malden, transit signal priority projects on Main Street in Malden and Everett and on Salem Street in Malden, and the addition of bike racks across a number of stations in the MBTA network. There are also some lower scoring but very affordable 1-year projects, including a transit app education program for older adults in Brookline, the installation of bike racks in Wellesley, and the installation of a parking management system around the South Acton commuter rail station. In contrast, there are the 3-year operating projects, most of which are shuttle services. These range in cost from a total request of $73,000 for a shuttle service in Stowe to roughly $1.05 million for a microtransit service for the Montechusett RTA. In addition to the shuttle projects, Everett has requested $282,000 over 3 years to support the formation of a transportation management association for the city. So we went over these projects at last week's MPO meeting and have reshared one-page descriptions for each of them, but please feel free to ask questions on these in order to arrive at a decision on how to approach funding. So my colleague Sandy Johnston, who manages this program, is also here as a resource, and many of the project proponents are also here today, and as you heard, have already provided some public comments to help put these projects in context. So there are no fewer than 3 options here to consider. First, this board may opt to maximize its future funding flexibility for this program. In this scenario, staff would recommend continuing funding for all pilot round projects and then funding only new capital projects in 2022 up to the program's $2 million allocation. This would minimize the number of multi-year funding commitments within the program, allowing more funding available for the consideration of other new projects in fiscal years 23 and 24. Second, this board may want to go above its $2 million community connections allocation in 2022 to utilize more of the available funding in this year. That could involve funding all existing pilot projects and all of the new capital projects, and then further considering whether or not to fund any additional operating projects that would involve commitments in fiscal years 23 and 24. Finally, this board may decide to fully fund all pilot projects and all new projects. This would maximize the spend in fiscal year 2022, allowing for the allocation of roughly $3.7 million in new funding, but would also leave the MPO on the hook for more than $1.3 million in 2023 and $920,000 in 2024, clearly placing limitations on the ability of this board to fund other new projects in this program in the coming years. And so even though there are 3 options outlined here, really any combination of the elements from any of these 3 scenarios are certainly available for your discussion and selection. Moving on to our other key decisions here. The second key decision is to address the remaining funding surplus in fiscal 2022. So even after allocating $2 million to the Community Connections Program, which is again our baseline allocation that we plan for in the long range plan, $14.8 million remains available for funding in 2022. These funds are the result of readiness-based delays for 4 projects in 2022, including the reconstruction of Mount Auburn Street in Watertown, the reconstruction of Rutherford Avenue in Boston, and the 2 intersection improvement projects on Route 1 and Route 1A in Norwood. Some things this board may want to consider when making decisions on this funding are future cost increases to currently programmed projects, which may place some level of demand on these remaining funds, as well as the vulnerability of these funds. So as a reminder, these funds will be in the first year of the forthcoming TIP, which only gives this board until September 30th, 2022 to find a use for them. This board has traditionally done an excellent job of allocating all funding available to it in every fiscal year. And so it's good to be cautious about leaving too much funding open early in the TIP without a clear use. That being said, these funds do not absolutely need to be allocated to a specific project today. It wasn't clear until last week that these funds would even necessarily be available as a part of this TIP process. So the short turnaround time left not that much time to come up with a robust set of new project options here. We may have some to discuss later in this meeting. But that being said, this year's TIP won't be endorsed by this board until late May, meaning there is some time between now and then to consider further options for these funds. And even if a solution can't be found by May, there's also the option of amending a project into the TIP after October 1st of this year, when the fiscal 22 through 26 TIP formally goes into effect. Those are some of your options on this funding surplus. I see a hand here. I don't know if we want to grab that now or if we want to wait until the end.
Well, Matt, I think usually you like to go to the end, but you already violated that concept by calling on Brian earlier. So let's let Jay talk. Jay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Matt. I guess I'm just trying to fully understand. If you go back one slide there for a second to where you have the different options. Nope, this one here, yep. Okay, so we have fund all new capital projects, 12 program, 2.352 million. And then in the previous bullet point, you have 2 million. So to me, the obvious thing, we have money in 2022. We don't know what to do with. I think these are all good community connections projects. My gut says, why don't we just fund all of them? But I'm trying to understand here on the last point, some of that funding would spill over into 2023 and 2024. So is that what you're saying is if you funded everything in the community connections as proposed, you would need to find another 1.3 million in 2023 and another, 920,000 in 2024? Is that it?
Yeah, so those 2023 and 2024 numbers, the 1.3 million and 920,000 would be taken out of the 2 million that we've already sort of set aside for the program in 23 and 24. And so going into next year, then we would have, $640,000 in 2023 to allocate to new projects in that year. And so it just sort of, reduces our flexibility for future years. But that being said, the 2 million is sort of the board's target allocation, and we can always change that number, but that's up to this board's discretion. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Jay. And we can definitely come back to some of these clarifying questions because I'm sure, some other similar thoughts are rolling around here. Okay. So let's see here. Okay, so as in 2022, there are also some funds left available in fiscal 2023. This $6.6 million remainder is left over after the Linfield Street project was moved from 2023 back into 2022, as was just mentioned. So as mentioned earlier, the MPO may want to consider the possibility of future project cost increases when deciding how to utilize these funds. But as we just sort of alluded to, the MPO could also decide to increase funding for community connections or any other project in fiscal 23 with the remaining funds. And so to that end, there are also 2 projects that are funded over multiple years that each had their first year of funding in 2023. It's the Mount Auburn Street project in Watertown and Rutherford Avenue in Boston. Either of those projects could be good candidates for receiving additional funding in 2023, which would decrease the obligations for those projects in their later fiscal years. So again, this board has the option to leave this funding unallocated for now, or it could opt to allocate it to specific existing projects like those just mentioned. And again, this board could also opt to increase the funding allocation for Community Connections Program in 2023 from its current $2 million level, if that were desirable. So our final key decision for today will be to determine what, if anything, to do with the remaining funding in fiscal year 2026. Currently, roughly $13.8 million remains available in what will be the final fiscal year of the forthcoming TIP. There are 14 projects vying for this funding, of which 11 are returning candidates from last year's TIP cycle. I note this because given the limited funding that we've had available for new projects in each of the last 2 years, there are now several projects that will likely remain unfunded into their 3rd year of consideration, despite having strong project scores. This is just one of many things that this board may want to think about as it makes decisions for these funds. Also on that list to consider is the potential for future cost increases, as always, plus the MPO's existing funding commitment to Rutherford Avenue. That funding commitment is projected to continue into 2027 at roughly $25 million in additional funding as things stand today. This board may also want to consider how these funds relate to any policy changes surrounding project programming that may be considered later this spring and summer. So on the menu of options here are at least 3 different paths. First, this board could elect to leave these funds unprogrammed, holding them for a future purpose. Second, this board could elect to add funding to an existing long-range plan project, such as Rutherford Avenue in Boston, or it could opt to begin funding for a new long-range plan project, something like Western Avenue in Lynn, the Route 9 and 27 interchange in Natick, or the McGrath Boulevard project in Somerville. As a reminder, these 3 projects are all programmed between 2025 and 2029 in the MPO's current long-range plan, meaning that if none of them are funded this cycle, all 3 will remain on deck for future cycles, even though we'll already be 40% of the way through this time band. Third, this board could opt to program a different high-scoring project or projects that were also considered for funding this year. So again, these 14 projects are all currently vying for funding in fiscal 2026. They're organized here by investment program and then by score. In bold in the middle here are the 3 long-range plan projects that I just mentioned. All of these other projects are very much in the mix for selection as well. So last year, this board opted to use its similarly limited funding to program only the single highest scoring project in each of the bicycle and pedestrian, complete streets, and intersection improvement investment programs. This board could explore a similar approach this year or seek to fund more new projects by selecting those that are lower cost. I should also note that scenario number 5 shows $40 million of funding for Rutherford Avenue in 2026. This number is not fixed, so it could be adjusted slightly to allow more room for funding for one of these other projects, should the MPO want to explore that option. But as always, we must be mindful of the overall cost schedule for that project to ensure that funding in 2026 or any other year doesn't dip below what is feasible in terms of an overall 5-year funding schedule. So for sort of practical purposes here, that means we maybe have $5 to $7 million of extra play in 2026 if we wanted to go over the existing 13.8 million for a new project. So I know that we went over this last week, and there's also a packet of 1-page descriptions of each of these projects available for your review. But I'm happy to talk through these options in more detail during the discussion if there are questions on specific projects. All right, bring it home here. So when making any of these decisions, I want us to have for reference the distribution of funds in scenario number 5 relative to the goals set for each investment program in the MPO's long-range plan. As you can see here, the current funding levels for each project type are not far off from those goals, but 6.5% of funding in the overall 5-year plan remains unallocated to any specific projects or programs. I know some board members have also recently requested that we check in on how our funds are currently distributed to each of the 8 subregions within our larger region. The blue bars on the left-hand side of each of these clusters represents the current funding distribution to each subregion, which you can see compared to each subregion's share of population, jobs, and roadway miles. In this instance, roughly 10% of all funds are shown as not distributed to a subregion, as the unprogrammed funds, as well as the funds currently held for community connections and transit modernization, are not yet allocated to specific geographies. Again, this is just one resource among many that you all are welcome to utilize during the discussion today as we talk through options for new projects. So winding down here with our goal for today, again, as a reminder, so this board needs to build a consensus on a draft TIP program, including the addition of any new projects, which will be released for public comment as part of the larger TIP report in late April. Before we get into a discussion, briefly highlight those next steps. So we'll take a little break from TIP programming at the next MPO meeting. I'm sure you all are very excited to have a break from me, but we will come back to this topic in late April when the board will vote to release the draft TIP for public review. After a 21-day public review period, all comments will be incorporated into the TIP and presented to this board. Pending any resulting changes, the final fiscal year's 22 through 26 TIP will be endorsed by this board in late May. As the TIP season winds down, we'll also start planning in earnest for the next one. That preparation this year begins with the continuation of some of the conversations that we've had in recent weeks around possible policy changes in response to project cost increases, a process that may also involve the formation of a committee with which these topics can be discussed in more detail. And with that, I will turn it back over to the chair to begin a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Before we start, there's a lot of detail to get through. We're already 49 minutes past what we were scheduled to go to. It's going to go long today and we may not get done. So I need some sense from the members of whether there's a possibility of having a meeting scheduled for next week if need be. So as you're thinking about the other things to talk about today, please think about whether that's possible for your schedule. Lynn Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's exactly what I was going to ask you to consider, and that would be a meeting, that would not have public comment. I mean, I love public comments. I respect them. I spend more of my time on that side of the table than this table, but I think we just need a meeting where we can really just discuss all of these options with enough time to really discuss them and not to rush our deliberations because we're tired or we have to go to another meeting. And so I would propose the meeting next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Jillian Linnell.
Yeah, I I know at the last week's meeting, there was a request for whether or not the T could put forward any projects for those federal fiscal year 22 funds. Would this be an appropriate time to run through some of those, or?
Sure.
All right, I apologize. I do not have any material prepared. I'm happy if there's another meeting scheduled next week to put together something more detailed. But in response to the request that was made, some projects that came up that we could have available and ready for federal fiscal year 22 include priority bus lanes, specifically looking at the Columbus Ave North segment, which is a roughly $14 to $15 million total project cost. This would be a center running bus lane, an extension of the currently under construction Columbus Ave bus lane that is expected to open later this summer. It would extend that to Ruggles. That would be one option. Number two would be roughly $6 million deployment of e-ink signs on the Green Line and or priority bus routes. This is actually a project that the T paused during the Forging Ahead exercise, so it would be an opportunity to restart some of those investments. There's another option to explore investments in elevator screens. This is a technology project to install digital screens at elevator entrances on the Mbta system so that riders who depend on the elevators know about outages in real time. Those funds would support backend software along with sign deployment. And then the fourth option, if folks are interested, would be the South Elm Street Bridge Replacement Project, which is roughly $14 to $15 million. This is a shovel-ready project, a state of good repair replacement of a structurally deficient bridge on the Haverhill line, which is currently approaching 100% design.
Thanks, Julie.
Yep.
Daniel Amstutz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of thoughts and comments as Matt was running through this. I do agree with what Jay Monty said earlier about the community connections programs in terms of funding them. I think if we have the money, I think in 22, I think it's appropriate to use on them. I think these are all worthy projects, and some of them have a few sort of lower scores, but I can certainly see the benefits of them, and I think we'll see the immediate. We'll see the immediacy of them, starting up and being implemented, and I think you can tell just based on the number of applications that there's these little projects that are sort of don't rise to the level of being full-on tip projects that communities want to do, and I'm really interested in those microtransit services, and so I'd be supportive of that. I think in terms of having another meeting, I agree that if we do have another meeting next week, which I personally could attend, maybe just zeroing in right on the tip for that to perhaps make it a shorter meeting and not sort of make it a full MPO meeting makes sense. And then in terms of the funding for fiscal year 2022, a thought came to mind whether or not any other projects over the course of the next year that are in fiscal year 23 might be ready in fiscal year 22. Apologies, just a moment. Sorry. And so what I'm, in any case, just noticing that the Framingham project that's in 2023, I guess went up about $600,000. It said the readiness of that was, I think, 75% comments received earlier this year. Just a thought on whether or not any of those projects could feasibly be ready or could be encouraged to be ready sooner, barring potentially getting another curveball next year of cost increases. But that was another thought in order to help bridge that gap for fiscal year 22. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wanted to just back up what Len Diggins had said and suggest that we recess this meeting and reconvene it next Thursday we will not have to then go through public comment and drag everyone back to make their comments again to us, which we've already heard. So I just wanted to second that consideration that Len put forward. And I also just wanted to thank you, to send my thanks to Jillian for the great list of projects there. I think those projects would have a huge benefit to a lot of people, and I certainly look forward to supporting them hopefully next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Taking tight.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I very much appreciate that this is a lot to process and make decisions on in the time that we've had, especially given the very enthusiastic public comments that we are getting. I've been trying to check with my staff on the implications of the timeline while we've been having this conversation, and there is a pretty significant concern that with trying to keep to the STIP schedule and releasing the tip for public comment at the end of April, it is likely that if we delay the selection of the scenarios in the Community Connections program, that we may have some shortcomings in that document, just based on the time it takes to complete the analysis and needing the full list of projects to be able to do that analysis. So that is something that we'll work with you, Mr. Chair, on identifying sort of what those shortcomings might be and how we might address them. But I just want to make sure everyone's sort of aware of that complication.
Thank you, Dagan. Other members? Okay, so we're at the point now where I need to figure out whether we're going to try to get this done today, which could take however long it takes, or whether we want to adjourn today, having a meeting next week, same time, one agenda item. We won't even have chair's reports or Tagan's report. We won't have anything except the tip development on the agenda. We will not have public comment, other than, of course, as always, if someone needs to comment during our discussion, we will try to call on them, subject to chair approval and control. But we won't have a public comment period, as much as it pains me to have a meeting without a public comment period. Or we can keep going, and we don't have to be done right this minute. We just have to know like what the members want to do. So is there a sense that people would like to get the community connections out of the way today, or just be done today and come back Thursday with a fresh start, or just power through? Brian?
I'll make a motion to adjourn if you'll accept it, Mr. Chairman.
Well, actually, I think that's a motion that's on the table. Is there a second? And then we'll take debate on it, if there's a second. Jay Monty, are you seconding it, or do you have a comment?
I will second that motion.
All right. So there's a motion and a second. Discussion on that motion. Motion is to adjourn today and come back on next week at 10 o'clock. Thatcher Keyser.
Yeah, I was going to comment that I have other commitments at 1, so I'm advocating, going to Thursday. But question to the chair: is it better to adjourn, or is it better to table, or whatever the appropriate order to continue the current meeting?
Yeah, I suppose we could recess. I don't recall us ever doing that. I don't think it matters for our purposes because we're not in the middle of a vote, right? So I think either one works. But if there's a parliamentarian out there who tells me otherwise during the discussion, we can certainly change. I'm sure Brian and Jay would change the motion to recess.
I'm in favor of whatever gets us to next week.
Thank you, Patrick. Next up, Eric Barassi.
Yes, I support that as well. And I would just ask Jillian, yes, more information about those projects, since a lot of them sounded like they were $14 million projects, which would, obviously have implications on whether we do other community connections things. So I think having that conversation and having more information on those details, understanding, the city of Boston's, perspective on those projects too, all of that would be really great. Thank you.
Other comments from MPO members? Seeing none, we're not actually taking public comment at this time because we have a motion on the table. But if you want to put the comment in the chat, Mr. Peterson, please feel free. So there's a motion and a second. I should let people know before we vote that in addition to what's been presented today, we had a brief discussion at the end of a meeting 2 weeks ago that we may be changing some of the cash flows on the Green Line project. So that may come into play as we move forward. We will put something together and get it up and post it as soon as we possibly can. I just want people to know it's about moving cash flow, not changing cash flow. And part of that reason is in the $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill. We got additional funding for the Green Line, so we're trying to make sure that we don't spend the MPO money before we need it in case we actually end up not needing it. So anyway, we'll put something together and put that up for everybody to review before next meeting. Any other debate or comments? Ken Miller.
Not exactly on the motion, if that's okay, David, but I won't be able to make it next week, but I did have a suggestion also at the end of the last meeting, I suggested a strategy that may be feasible to fill the gap in 2022, and that is have the state take more money for a state project in 2021, and then make the MPO whole in the following year. So in effect, change the target from $90 million in 1 year to 110, or whatever it would be, to sort of address some of that gap. I don't know if it's an accounting device. It wouldn't really affect anything. For example, on the Sumner Tunnel, you're using other federal funds of some sort. You could just use less of those other federal funds and make them use the MPO, whatever target funds, and then make those funds available for the MPO in the following year, in effect increasing the target when you had projects. So that's just I think maybe an option. I don't know. I'm sure it will be a headache for folks to keep track of, perhaps at state, but I'll just throw that out there to see if that's a feasible option to address the gap. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. So as Matthew Peterson has very kindly pointed out in the chat, it's probably best to actually make this a motion to recess, because then when we come back, the public comment period we took today will quote unquote count as the public comment period for the meeting. So Brian and Jay, do you mind amending your motion to recess until April 1st at 10 o'clock as opposed to adjourn today? Brian?
I'd like to propose a friendly amendment to my motion to make it a motion to recess instead of adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Jay, are you seconding that?
Yeah, I will second that.
Thank you. Motion having been made and seconded and discussed to recess today's meeting until next Thursday at 10 o'clock, with the only agenda item being the continuation of this discussion. Jonathan, please call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Yes.
Brian Kane,
Recess is my favorite subject, yes.
Leonard Diggins. Leonard Diggins,
Sorry about that. Having problems muting. What to do is yes.
Tom Kadzis,
Okay, yes.
Joe Blankenship,
Joe Blankenship, yes.
thank you. Jay Monty,
Yes.
David Kozis,
Yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain,
Yes.
Tom Bent,
Yes.
Austin Saganowitz,
Yes.
Thatcher Keyser,
Patrick Keyser votes yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen votes yes.
Tina Cassidy,
Tina Cassidy votes yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you all very much. And thank you for all your hard work, staff, and to all the members of the public. Thank you very much for all your comments. And we will see everybody next week, 10 o'clock, one agenda item. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.